everyone, and welcome to another interview on Human. Today we will be interviewing Christopher Akana, a man who has traveled the world, has lived in many different countries, is an author of multiple books, has climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. I mean, I could go on and on. The list is extremely long as to what this man has accomplished, and today we will be finding out his story. All right. So, without further ado, let us take the time to bring him in. Hope everyone is doing well. I want to say thank you for tuning in. Since you have the time, if you do have the time, yes, we will be taking off pretty soon.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's a new phone.
Okay, that was funny. He turned on the
Got to see my
side
water
camera.
bottle.
Yeah, for a second I'm like, is he in the laboratory? Yeah, it was
This actually is my little laboratory. So
that was funny. Um, Without further ado, how are you doing today?
good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I work overnights, so it's
Oof.
yeah. So to wake up, I have to like kind of snap out of my sleep and then like get to doing certain things. So it's been quite interesting adjustment. Let's put it that way. Nothing too
I
negative. Um,
I can imagine.
yes, indeed. I have a wide range of questions for you here today, actually, because yeah, I went through the bio. There's a lot to speak about. A lot. I don't even know if hopefully we'll be able to cover everything today for sure. Um,
I'll just need to talk fast.
well, well, don't talk too fast because I want people to understand what you're saying for sure. And this is your time. You could take as much time as you need to explain your story. So I wanted you to please introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. Well, my name is Chris Ancona. Um, I guess it's really hard to know how to introduce myself. I mean, who I am really is passion. I like to inspire people. Um, I like to do things all perfect and right, and I like to bring peace and love into the world. So that's kind of me.
Mm,
It's kind of a weird introduction, but I just going to go a little bit off topic. I'm an engineer, so I have this weird brain. Lots of people have told me about it, and I did this little survey, and I asked people if they were meeting somebody online and they couldn't see them, and they had to explain who they were. How would they do that? And people mostly responded, well, I'm, 5'7", I'm female, I have brown hair, blue eyes, I'm a teacher, I'm a parent, blah, 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 blah. And then I asked another question. I said, okay, you come home from work and you had a bad day, and you're looking for somebody to talk to. What type of person or who is the person that you want to talk to? And people were like, well, caring and empathetic and a good listener. And they didn't say anything about how tall they were or if they were a parent or a teacher or whatever. They were looking at the type of person that they were. And so I've been thinking a lot about this. And when people ask me, who are you? I'm like, well, how really should I answer that? Should I answer it in the way, like, should I answer it in the traditional way, or should I give somebody something that might actually mean something to them? So yeah, that's why you caught me right at a time where I'm working on what does this mean, this answer, these two questions.
Mm.
And so yeah, that's why I say it's a bit of a weird, maybe introduction, but I don't know.
No,
If you want the other stuff, I can give you that too.
no, it's not. No, it's not weird. It's actually, I'm happy that you started the interview that way. And I wanted to piggyback off what you're saying by saying that at times, I read a book called Happiness is the Way by Dwayne W. Dyer. And he talked
Mhm.
about stripping away from labels and then what would that look like if we did that? Like it'll become a question more so of instead of who I am, like what am I? After we strip away all those labels and you really start to get to who you are in the center, right? So I like the way that you made that distinction. That was really good, though. I look forward to people learning from that for sure. Yes, indeed. Where are you from originally? Because I see that you've been around many different places. So I just wanted to start there.
Yeah, so I was born in Detroit, Michigan, or Livonia for anybody who knows that. So I actually live like, so 8 Mile, which people probably are very familiar with from M&M. That's actually 2 miles away from where I was. So I grew up on 6 Mile. So Detroit's kind of weird. It's like 5 mile, 6 mile, 7 mile, 8 mile, 9 mile. It keeps going that way. It's really a big grid.
Mm.
So I was born in until I was about 10 years old. That's where I grew up. So yeah, and then after that was a little bit weird. But anyways, I'm from Detroit, Michigan-ish.
How was it in Detroit? I've heard different stories about Detroit. I've been to Detroit like several hours, maybe almost 24 hours I was in Detroit. Just about I had went to Port Huron, Michigan at one point.
Okay.
And so
Yeah, that's north of Detroit. Yeah. So
yeah, it is.
when you look on a map, they're this far apart, but when you have to drive it, it's like 3 hours.
I went with some people that were from Detroit. I
Yeah.
remember. But how was that experience growing up in Detroit?
Yeah, so I mean, Detroit's kind of weird. So I spent some time in just outside of Detroit on one side, and then just outside of Detroit on another side. Um, and then I moved out to the country. And where I first was in Detroit, I mean, you're a kid, right? So the experience obviously changes as you get a bit older. So I lived in a small area. I went to Catholic school, so I didn't have school type stuff. I mean, we still like there was still a nun who was a principal, so it was pretty strict. Um,
Mm.
but it was a quiet road. We had an ice cream truck that went down the street. The houses were small. They weren't so brilliant. I mean, it was kind of like, I guess, a lower middle class type area.
Mm.
It's so hard now because life has changed so much. But back then, the world was a different place. When I moved to Sterling Heights, I was also a bit older, and then it was a bit rougher actually.
Mm.
So I had a few fights, as a kid, in the first part of Detroit. When I moved to Sterling Heights, then I lived in a place for a couple of years called the Cigarette Sub. So every subdivision road was named after a cigarette brand, and that was a bit rougher, right? That was, there was a lot of fighting in there, and that was a tougher place. So
Mm.
so yeah. But then moved out the countryside. That was a very different world again. So different different places, different experiences, but also different ages, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I was so close to cracking the joke. I'm sorry. I was like, yeah, you can catch these hands on Marlboro Avenue in
Yeah,
Newport
yeah, yeah.
Place.
Yeah, yeah. Camel, Marlboro, Newport. Yeah. Those are the names of the roads. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's exactly that. It was exactly that.
Um, so I see that during your childhood, um, you had, I could truly say that based on the bio, it wasn't the easiest road to navigate at a younger age. So I do have some
Mm.
questions that could possibly not, that could help somebody else in the future, right, who may be going through similar things too. Um, Based on your experience, because I remember you speaking about your parents being divorced, I was wondering, how do you think a divorce impacts a child? Since
Yeah,
experiencing that into your older age and whatever experiences you've came across.
yeah. So I think I had a quite unique, well, maybe not. Maybe I didn't have a unique experience, but when I was, my parents had us, me and my brother and my sister, quite young. I think my mom was 18, my dad was like 20 or something. So they were quite young. They probably shouldn't have had kids. At one point, my mom said, "Yeah, we had kids because that's what everybody else was doing, and they wanted to keep up with their friends. That's why they got married and everything too." So there was that going on, but they didn't really. I think they didn't. Well, it's hard to say. Well, my mom very didn't want to have kids later on. But what that meant was when we were young, I mean, I grew up with my grandparents. They happened to live across the street, so I'd go over their house, play with the dog, all that type of stuff. And so that was a pretty traditional childhood. My parents were just not around very much, and I'd see them very, very rarely. You could tell that they didn't really like a lot of, they would make me go to bed at 8 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night. They wouldn't let me get out of bed till 11 o'clock in the morning. So they wanted their time without kids. But when my parents did get divorced, I was already a bit older, and they I think everything kind of fell apart when my grandparents moved out to the countryside because now they had to actually take care of us, and they were not. It became really, really real that that was not going to work. And so I'd already had this good, caring relationship with my grandparents. So now when my parents were taking over, that's when the disaster hit. And then the divorce came very quickly. So I didn't have let's say I didn't have the experience like other people have where they're attached to their parents, and then the two people that they're attached to separate and they have to choose. I was connected to my grandparents, and when my two parents separated, I'm like, uh-oh, what's this? It was a different world. And then I got to learn the two different personalities of my parents for the first time. And yeah, when you learn the personalities after the fact, you realize, oh yeah, they shouldn't have been parents. So that's when the really bad stuff started happening. But before that, it wasn't so much because they weren't there. So
What do you think is a character type that would that you would say a person would not be fit to be a parent? Maybe okay, maybe not a character type,
well,
but if you give
well,
me a
so
description like, hey, these are things that you should consider if these are things that you should consider that take into account before you either become a parent or I don't think you should possibly go into being a parent if you're not ready to deal with these type of situations. What would that look like for
yeah, well, I think it changes. I think there's something that has to do with age there as well.
you? Hmm.
In my case, my mother came out directly after and said she didn't want to have kids. She didn't want kids. Like she went to court and said that. So there's actually a court document that says that she said this.
Mm.
Um, but I think at least in the case of younger parents like my parents, they still needed to build their life. They were kids. And when you have a kid, when you have a baby, they need a lot of attention. They need love, they need care, they need attention. It takes time. They just have a whole bunch of needs. And if you as an adult have a bunch of needs that need to be taken care of, you don't have the space for them. And the kids need that space. So I think the most horrible thing and the most horrible experience as being a parent is when your kids are in the way of where you want to go in your life. You want to build a career, you want to build a future, you want to do this, you want to do that, and your kids are holding you back.
Mm.
And that leads to tension, it leads to conflict, it leads to kind of like dislike of your kids because they are the problem right now. So if you're not to a place where you're ready, where you want them to be in your life and you want to give time for them and you have the space for them emotionally, mentally, everything, yeah, it's tough to have kids in that place.
Mm.
I mean, kids are great and you learn a lot, but you have to be willing to learn how much space they take because they just do. Um, and I think that kind of applies to my mom. My dad, my dad came from a very bad. No, I don't. That's maybe too general. My dad's relationship with his dad was not the type of relationship that we would hope for a father and son relationship. And all he did is reproduce that onto me. which just didn't work. Um, so I think in my no clue how to do that.
Hmm.
And whether or not he should or shouldn't have kids, I can't really say. But I can say when I was young, he did not know how to be a dad. He just didn't know how to do it. And his way of dealing with it today would be, well, even back then, it would be called serious abuse. So both mental and physical. So, and my father was just an aggressive person, so it's not surprising that's where he would go. But that's also the way he was raised, and so he didn't know how to do anything different. So
I want to be open also and say that I have, excuse me, experienced abuse also. I did want to lead that by saying that I did want to lead into a question, which is, do you think that abuse was common back in that era? And if so, why? Because I run across a lot of people who kind of it's very similar stories. Some of them, yeah. Continue, Chris.
I I don't know if it was, well, let me say it like this. When I finally was able to escape, and I'm going to tell you a quick story, and I think that might relate to at least part of the answer I want to give. The way I was able to escape my father, because at 12 I was emancipated, so I was able to get a lawyer. I was able to go to court. It's called a guardian ad litem for young people, and I was able to convince a judge that my father wasn't going to be the one who took care of me anymore. My mother had already said she didn't want me, so that was done. But I needed to escape my father, and if I wouldn't have, I would likely be dead today. Like in my mind, it's clear as day that I would not be alive. Um, but the way that the court considered my petition, the way that I won, was not because I had pictures of bruises all down my body. It wasn't because my brother and sister said, "Yeah, your dad, his dad, he focuses on him and he goes after him." None of that mattered. What mattered was that I was a Catholic since I was born. I was raised Catholic, and my father changed to be Protestant. And because my father changed to be Protestant and I have a freedom of religion choice, they allowed me to go with my grandparents and be emancipated from my family. So the abuse back then wasn't even considered important enough that that would be a reason for me to be emancipated. It was the religious aspect of it. And so I think maybe the mentality was a bit different back then. I don't know if that argument would still be the predominant argument today. But back then, the fight is in court about the abuse went on for a long time, and it didn't. The way that they won was not with the abuse. It didn't matter if I had journals, if I had pictures, if my brother and sister said the same thing. None of that mattered. And I think when you approach wanting to talk about abuse, and that's the culture around you, I think you suppress it, you hide it, and now being able to get it out for a lot of people is a big thing. But people are more aware now, and it's more talked about, and there's more repercussions for it. So there's a whole, I think, cultural change. So it could be that it was more common because it wasn't taken seriously, or it wasn't looked at as something as important, or I think there's a whole bunch of reasons that fitted into why my emancipation went the way that it did, and it didn't go with another way. And that's, I guess, without looking at the scientific evidence of, abuse rates or anything, which I think would be hard because if people didn't report it, you wouldn't have it. And so when it becomes easier to talk about, then people answer surveys differently, and you can see an increase actually when actually there's a decrease, because before people weren't willing to answer the question that way. So I guess the best I have is this as an example, and then kind of that leaves the question mark of, why was it that way, and did that have something to do with maybe why the abuse was more prevalent in the past, or why abuse, at least now, is coming out in a different way. So, yeah, sorry if that's not a great answer, but it's the best I have, I think.
It's no problem, Chris. There's no pressure here. I'm not sitting here gauging the answer for sure. I'm not.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
You're good, brother. I wanted to ask you, moving forward what was the phrase that you used when it came to emancipation that you went through as a kid? What was it called again?
So you mean the type of lawyer I had? So there's a
It's
lawyer's called a guardian ad litem,
okay, Guardian
and that's a
Litem.
lawyer, that's a court appointed lawyer for a child,
Wow,
for a minor, right?
interesting. That's new. I've never heard of that one before.
I mean, me
Wow.
neither until it happened. So, and I'm probably even pronouncing it right. It's probably some other Latin saying or something, but it sounds to me like guardian ad litem, but maybe it's slightly different. But I'm sure you can find the definition online.
It's fine. Yeah, there's no pressure for you to be correct necessarily. I just wanted to um rehear that because I had never heard it before. And usually when I hear people talk about emancipation, they talk about it in a way of like just more splitting from their family than actually going through the legal process of actually going ahead and doing that, which is very
Yeah, well,
interesting
when
in a
you're
sense.
the soonest you can do it is when you're 12. At least back then, it was when you're 12 years old. Before that, you don't get a choice. So it just happened to be in my family, I was the first to reach age 12. So then I had this new power, let's say, to make a decision like that. But I needed a lawyer, and the judge, because of the petitioning of my grandparents and because of the journals that I'd written and things like that, the judge agreed to appoint a guardian ad litem because, basically it was a court fight, and there's always two sides and they're always arguing and the judge doesn't know who's right. So finally they were able to ask me, being 12, and that's when I got my own lawyer at that point, or a lawyer appointed to me, I should say.
Hmm. I see that I wanted to I interviewed somebody back in the day who was in Ireland, and we had a conversation about money, right? The impact of money.
Mm.
But the question I have towards money is how does the drive to constantly go after money affect a family structure from what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that drove so much in my family is money. My family's been very money focused. Let's say my father's side of the family has been very money focused. All of them have money today, pretty much. Um, some of them are, in my opinion, missing out on a lot because of their pursuit of money. And I think my father, one of his problems was that he was young and he needed to prove that he could get money and he needed to take care of a family. And so he just worked all the time and he was never there. And my father would, I don't know, I think the minimum day he'd work would be 12 hours, and he worked weekends. And he did it all because, he was a union guy. So over 40 hours, he gets time and a half. Over 55 hours, he gets double time. So he made all of his money when he worked on the weekend because he get double time. So that meant that he wasn't there for his family. That's meant that I didn't get to know my father at all until my parents were divorced, and then I had to live with just him. Maybe it would have been a totally different experience. Maybe I would have left much earlier, done worse things if I'd known him before, like in a bigger way. But he continued that even after the divorce with his next wife, and I think that caused a lot of problems in that relationship too. And I think he's, at least from my father, I think his pursuit of money, his need to have more, um, cost him everything. And he could have had a very different life had he focused on other things, focused on relationships, focused on people, focused on, how do I love these people who are different than me or think differently than me. Um, but for him, he's maybe had an old style thing that the man's job is to support the family. And that's his way of showing love. So that's what he has to do, and nothing else matters. It's like, I put the food on the table, I put the roof over the head, shut up. This is the way that the world is. Deal with it. And if you don't want my food and you don't want my roof, there's the door. And I think
Mm.
that mentality was, I think it's horrible for as a father and as a child who's dealing with a father like that. But that was a very traditional mentality in the past. And then you have people that they just have something to prove where they need more and more and more. And you don't have, if you're searching for money, you don't have time for anything else of life. And I just think it's the stupidest thing ever. So I have very particular views on money. I'm a minimalist and I'm a value investor. So I just, I don't get the pursuit of money for just having more. It doesn't make any sense to me. So, but I know there's a lot of people like that.
Mm. You know, that is that's very steep because I feel like in today's society it's important to talk about these things. I see a lot of people maintain two jobs just to uphold themselves, you know, and I oftentimes find myself asking myself and them, like, when do you have time to live? Right? If you're always pursuing something, when do you have time to live? Um, so moving forward, I wanted to ask, how important were your grandparents to your upbringing? I wanted to change the flow of the
Oh
conversation
yeah,
because I know they were a highlight,
yeah.
and I know you definitely
They
loved them to
they
death. I
were.
love my grandmother too. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, let me connect those two. Because I'm not, you don't need to listen to my financial advice, but uh, part of my experience with my grandparents impacted how I thought about money. Because
Hmm.
my grandparents fought to get me away from my father. Like they spent their retirement, and then rather than them having a house in Florida and a house in Michigan, which would be traditional for that generation,
Hmm.
going down with their family, snowbirds. They go down with their family in the wintertime, down to Florida with their friends. They have fun down there. They come back to Michigan in the summertime, and they have two houses. And my grandparents had a lake house, a lake cottage that was like, I don't think like 500 square feet or something. And when they were deciding to fight for us, my grandpa actually added on 3 bedrooms to the house, so he had space for us. He did it with his own hands in order to save money, and they spent their retirement money to do that. And they spent lots of money fighting for us in court. So they went to court, not my mom. They were the ones in court. They spent their retirement money to do that. But that meant when they finally did get us, that they didn't have money. They'd spent it all on that. So they just had a small retirement, and um, and that's what there was. There just wasn't more. And so we grew up still quite poor. But and I used to collect. I used to go down the streets and I used to collect. I don't know if you have which state you're in, but in Michigan, when you have a pop bottle or a can, you get 10 cents refund. So I go collect them all as a kid, and I would take them back to the corner store, and that's how I get money for candy or whatever else I wanted. And I love doing that. I go around. It's like money's like I gotta find some money. I go looking for that stuff, and um, I had a paper out. As soon as I could get a paper out to get some money, but it was never a burden. It was like, okay, this is a situation. This is what I'm going to do to deal with it for myself. And I found that I really didn't need much to be happy. I get a box of worms and I get a fishing pole and I have a great day. And my grandparents bought a little plastic paddle boat, so I just go out on the paddle boat and I'd hunt turtles and I'd look for clams and crayfish and everything, and it was great. And there was one time when I couldn't participate in school sports because we didn't have the money to pay the fee for going to playing in high school.
Mm.
Um, so that would happen, and okay, so I took a different sport that we could afford. Um, but I learned that it really, like, what made me happy was simple stuff because I didn't get a lot of toys. And I didn't really want them. My grandpa helped me like build a bike because I didn't have money for a bike. So, I never rode it, but it was fun to build. And we got it from, spare parts and stuff. So I learned that. And I mean, that gives you an example of how great my grandparents were. I mean, they were the old type. I get to do what I want. I can go where I want. I mean, around, where I can walk. So fishing, they didn't bother me so much with the stuff. They let me live and grow and just enjoy life as a kid. And there wasn't pressure about you got to figure out what you're going to do for your job and you got to do this and you got to do that. It was just, we're kids and we figured it out. But yeah, I mean, they did save my life and they gave me a real childhood. But then when I graduated, they didn't have money for college. Well, it kind of gets it's a crazy thing that happened. I wanted to go to the military because I didn't have any money. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to the
I
military.
read
I'm gonna
that.
pay for my college. This is a great way. So that's what I signed up to go, and I didn't get the job I didn't get anything that I wanted. They basically told me you're going to do this. End of story. And they're like, there's no other jobs. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I was going to be a Patriot missile crew member. So, and my senior year, I played football in high school, and I dislocated my shoulder 2 times.
Mm.
I didn't think this was a big deal. I was on the delayed entry program. I told my sergeant all that. Yeah, I dislocated my shoulder. And I showed up for active duty. I remember I had a big party and I had all my friends over because I was leaving the next day and I wasn't going to be back for 3 years. And my girlfriend was there, my friends are there, and I'd spent money on the party stuff, and then I'd spent all the rest of the money that I had on because you got to buy a bag, you got to put shoes in it and underwear and socks, and you got to have $10 for a haircut. So this is everything I had now. And my sergeant picks me up the next day, and we go to MEPS in Detroit, and I show up, and we're all there, and they have us in our skivvies, all lined up. And the doctor comes out, and he goes, Private Ancona, come into my office now. I'm like, oh, what did I do wrong? I just got here. And walk in, and I go in his office, and I'll never forget, he pulls this book out of his bookshelf. He got a ton of books. I don't know how he found this one. And he opens up to some random page, and there's this little teeny tiny paragraph. It says, you cannot be in the military if you've had a major joint dislocated more than once. And I had it twice. So he goes, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to give you a medical disqualification. You're going home, son. And I'm like, what? And so I go to my sergeant that's waiting out there, and I'm like, sorry, they said I have a medical disqualification. I'm not allowed to go. And he's like, what? So he's like, well, here's what you're doing. We're going to go back. We're going to get you home. We're going to see if we can get you in and get past this thing. So he takes me home, and I'm like, I show up my door, I knock on my grandma's door, and she's like, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in the military. I'm like, well, they gave me a medical disqualification. She goes, I don't believe you. This is all your fault. You're out on the street. And she kicked me out in the street. And thankfully, my girlfriend lived just a block over. So I went over to her house and knocked on the door. I said, hey, look, I'm back. She's like, I'm like, can I stay at your house? I've been kicked out. And so they let me stay at their house. And it took a good solid week to convince my grandma to let me back in the house. And thankfully, my girlfriend's parents were really nice. And she let me come back in it was beginning of July. The condition was I had to start college in September. I had no money, I had no job, I had nothing. I had to figure it out. And I called one of my friends and I said, hey, look, I heard you're working at this place. Can I come work with you? And we were wiring control panels for the assembly lines. So they got these big, huge machines, and somebody's got to run all the wires inside those machines. And so I did that. I would go to work. I'd work as much as my buddy would let me stay. And we any day he was willing to drive, because I didn't have a car either. So he had to drive me. And I'd earn just enough money to buy a car and to pay for one semester at community college. And that's how it started. But my grandparents, they were generous to me. I mean, like I said, they saved my life. If I would be dead without them. But they also weren't like, okay, you just get to slide through life. It's like, no. Get off your butt and make something happen. They knew I could. I mean, I'd already done a lot of stuff. There's some other stuff that happened that I ended up being really good at. But they knew that they needed to push me, that I couldn't just slough off. And that was great, right? And I learned to live on very, very little, because when you don't have anything, you learn to live on, whatever. And my school experience was very different than most people's.
Hmm.
I remember I didn't have money for food, but I found that all of the clubs on campus, if you went to their meeting, they gave away free sandwiches. So I joined every club on campus, every single one. I was part of the Society of Women Engineers because they had good sandwiches. Sometimes sometimes those meetings, that'd be all the food I ate, right?
I know what you're talking about in my own way. Not because I exactly did that, but I went through similar situations just for showing up to different places, just because I know the food is definitely going to be there and it's going to be good. It reminds me
Yep.
of
Oh
Thanksgiving,
yeah.
kind of, right? Like I'm not a person that traditionally like celebrates Thanksgiving, but I'll go over and I'll eat the food for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, I wanted to ask you a question. How did it feel to have to take a different path after facing that rejection from the U.S. military? Because I know you had prepared, you had parties. I know your heart was in it. So at times I feel like people, and they can learn from your experience, because sometimes it pains us, sometimes it hurts, sometimes we're able to smooth over and just go into something else. But how did you handle that personally?
Well, I mean, it was like the rug getting pulled out of you. I mean, I had no plans. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. I just knew for 3 years I was going to be doing whatever the military told me I had to do. I mean, I was very Forrest Gump about it. And then when you got nothing, you're like, uh-oh, what am I going to do now? And well, where I was, so one thing I didn't say, in high school, I was very, very fortunate. I went to public high school and they had a deal with General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, because at that time, way back a long time ago, the thing that was coming on was automation in manufacturing. And the biggest problem that they had to deal with, the big companies, was there's nobody who knew how to program robots or do maintenance on robots or anything, the ones that grab the parts and put them in the right places.
Hmm.
So my high school had a robotics program. And basically all of the old robots, well, the ones that they wanted, from that were taken off assembly lines were given to us. And so I get to play with all this robotic stuff. So I learned to like wire stuff up and do programming and all this kind of stuff. So that was the only skill set that I had to fall back on. And I had it, thankfully. That's why I was wiring control panels for assembly lines, because I could raise my hand and go, hey, I can do that. And it was okay, it was a job, right? I mean, I was sitting in a chair, wiring stuff up, following plans and getting wires and things all day, whatever. So when I had to go to university, it happened to be that Washtenaw Community College, they had an agreement with my high school that anybody who went through that program could go into their robotics program. And it was a 2-year program. So I was like, okay, this is my only option. There's a pathway laid out to me totally by accident. That's the path I'm going to take. And so that I went to Washtenaw, and actually a professor there that changed my whole life, that changed me in a different direction. So where I ended up wasn't where I was thinking I was going to end up. Because remember, I had no clue. I just knew that I had done robotics. And by the way, the only reason I did robotics in that is because my father told me I couldn't. So one of his big things was I was useless. I couldn't do anything. And my father's an electrician. So after I left, I wanted to show him that I wanted to prove him wrong. I wanted to prove my kid. So that's why I had that skill set, fighting against my father. And the pathway was laid out to go to Washtenaw. So I did. And I was supposed to be a robotic technician working on an assembly line. And it's funny. It's kind of a weird thing that happened at community college. Anybody can go.
Hmm.
And we had to take an electronics class. It's just one of the credits you have to take. And we'd already done that, most of us. And all of my class from high school pretty much was in the same class. And in that class, there was also other people, particularly 2 old ladies. And I don't know how they were. Maybe they were 65. I mean, they were retired. They were just curious about what this electronic stuff was, and so they took the class. Well, in our class, we had one guy who was very loud and annoying, and he liked to make fun of everybody. And anytime these ladies would ask a question, and they were asking very rudimentary questions compared to where we were, he would just make jokes about it. And the professor got ticked off. And it was the first week of school. This was class number 2, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And he announced on Wednesday, he goes, hey, you yahoos, I'll tell you what, I'll give you the final exam on Friday. Anybody who passes that exam doesn't have to take this class. The rest of you, if you don't pass the exam, shut up, and you're going to go through the semester. And so on Friday we all took the exam, and on Monday we got the results back, and I was the only one who passed. And everybody was ticked off at me. You can imagine my whole class like just making fun of me like crazy. And everybody left, and I'm just sitting behind, and I'm like, okay. And the teacher pulled me aside, and he goes, what do you want to do when you graduate from this? And I said, well, I don't know. I thought about, maybe managing some projects or doing something like that. He goes, man, you're in the wrong program. Like, what do you mean? He's like, no. You need to go to engineering school. Come with me. And he took me down. He physically took me down to the career planning office. Oops. And he said, hey, put this guy in pre-engineering science. And so he changed my whole schedule from drafting and all this stuff to English and mathematics and physics and all this other stuff. And I was scared to death because I had no money, I had nothing. And my 2 years at Washtenaw were going to get me a guaranteed job. And this new thing, I was going to spend 2 years and 2 years of money. And when I graduated, I would have nothing except for English, math, and physics classes. So, that type of stuff. And I was like, there's no job for that. Like, you don't get a job. What am I going to do? And I was freaking out. because it was super scary. And I had to catch up because in high school, I spent all my time in robotics. I was a lab nerd. I lived down there. And so I kind of ignored everything else. So they considered me an AC student, C kind of barely. I had A's in robotics. I had A's in advanced biology, like AP biology, because I love that. I had A's. But in like algebra, in English, in history, and all those other classes, government, I got like C minus. So where I wanted to focus, I do good, and where I didn't want to focus, I barely slid by. But that meant English, math, all of that other stuff, I didn't do. So I had to take all of that over, which meant every single semester I was taking 22 credits, like, because I had to catch up. And at Washtenaw, when you get above a certain number of credits, the other ones are free. So I was like, okay, I got to maximize this. So yeah, I mean, it was rough. It was rough. But that one professor, he's who set me on that direction to get an engineering degree. And that's how I graduated from U of M eventually with my mechanical engineering degree, was because he did that on that day, which meant that that guy in my class who was loud and annoying and making fun of those old ladies, it's thanks to him that I got an engineering degree, because otherwise I would have gone through the whole class and life would have been totally different. Would have never known.
I love how you brought the story full circle. That was nice. That was cool. Like the way you started and then everything that you discussed in the middle, and then how you led it back to the point of the guy being loud. That was cool. It's cool.
It's crazy how some of that works. It's really crazy.
You never know. Like, perfect example, just a story for a story. Human started out just as a logo, to be totally honest. I didn't know what it was going to become. I just drew it by happenstance. I was sitting down and it's like something just came over me and I started drawing it. And then from there, it just started working its way through me. Now here we are, fast forward. Here we are today
Hmm.
having a whole full-fledged interview. If you would have asked me 5 years ago when I was doing events, if I would have been a journalist, I would have told you no, for sure, hands down. But here I am. And I'm also thinking about getting back into music and DJing because I used to do music also, you know. So just to throw that out there, I want to
That's
do
fun.
that. Yeah, just for a hobby at least, you know, just for something just to, I call it musical therapy, right? Like DJing, you mix together tracks that, you know of and that you like. You're not necessarily feeling the pressure of doing it for other people, just something more therapeutic above all. Moving
Nice.
forward, uh, I wanted to highlight the robotics piece because I do remember we spoke about AI. So, what do you feel about robotics from when you were dealing with it within that time frame that you just gave us and discussed, all the way to where we are now?
Yeah,
Whew.
but obviously advancements have been great. Um, I learned Fortran. People don't even know what Fortran is today. And I started learning something new and advanced called C, which is like nobody uses any of that stuff today. Everybody's using Python and all these other things that didn't even exist back then. HTML was a big deal. Nobody uses that anymore.
Yeah, they don't.
So so much has changed in computer chips. I did a speech some years ago, and I was talking about when I graduated high school, we had internet and we had computers, and a fast internet connection was 14K. And when you think about today, what you can do just in the cloud, and what you can do, this phone that I'm using right now is more powerful than my computer when I graduated high school. I mean, multiples and multiples times faster. So I think back then we were cavemen when it came to using robotics. And today, I mean, now if you've seen Boston Dynamics, they have robots that can dance, like stand on two legs and dance. It's phenomenal. I mean, absolutely great stuff. That being said, I work with machine learning stuff. So I'm still an engineer, even if I write and I do this other stuff. I'm still an
Mhm.
engineer, and I work with machine learning stuff. We do things like being able to scan all the roads and automatically find potholes and street signs that are damaged and all that kind of stuff. I mean, so that you can basically inform somebody. So you just you have somebody driving around the cities and stuff, and it's automatically finding problems and informing the city services that, hey, look, you got a problem here, you need to fix,
Mhm.
or at least should be aware about what you should be aware of. And then we're working on some other stuff. Um, but it's I think we still have a long way to go. And I think there's a lot of people overstate what AI can do and what it is. And that has to do with just media because there's a reality behind it that's very different than the truth. So, for
Mm.
example, when I think of AI, it's so far behind. What I want is I want Jarvis from Iron Man. Like that would actually be useful. I could use that. We are so far away from even a Jarvis. And I think Jarvis is a magnificent tool. Things would be so much easier, but it's eons away from that, and it's advancing fast, but not as fast as people think. I mean, think about this. You could have a 4-year-old kid, and you show them a single picture of a cat, and that child will be able to find like 99.9% of cats in the world. They'll see a tail sticking out from behind a tree and go cat, or an ear and part of a face sticking out from behind a sign or something and say cat.
Mhm.
An AI, after you show it 10, and that's after one picture, by the way. An AI, after you show it 10,000 pictures of cats, is going to get right probably 95% of the time. I mean, that's not so smart actually. And that's what we face when we're doing training for artificial intelligence to find potholes. You're literally taking like thousands of kilometers of road and you're like clicking on this is a pothole, and you're doing thousands and thousands of potholes to show it what a pothole is, hoping that it's going to find potholes, and it's not going to get it right all the time. It's going to get it wrong. It's going to point at stuff that isn't a pothole, and then you have to tell it, no, that's not a pothole. And it's going to miss potholes, and you have to retell it that's a pothole. So you're continuously training it with thousands and thousands and thousands of images. So they're not really that smart. But people misconceive it like they're going to take over the world. And we're going to have to show them so many times how to take over the world before they get it right. I mean, we didn't have that many times. It's a bit, I think people are more scared than it's going to take away jobs, right? But back when I was doing robotics and I was putting robotics on, working to put a robotics on, that was taking away jobs too. And back then, when you look at it, there was a job being taken away, the guy who had to pick this up and put it over there, and now it's a robot doing it. And so that guy's job was gone. But there was 3 jobs created around those damn robots because they break down, they have to be repaired. You have to you want to look at upcycle times. Now you need a manager to manage making sure they're all up all the time. You have tool design and tool optimization. You have like all of these things that it can do. But at the same time, people behind all the unions and everything were saying, yeah, but the robot never stops working. So you can't compete with the robot because it work all the time. There was an advantage robots gave, but they also created lots of other jobs in other places. And I think that's what we're missing today is we don't see all the other jobs that are possible for when AI comes out. And there's going to be different. They're going to be different. There's going to be a whole lot of displacement. That's for sure. So I think somebody wrote they can process 1,000 images at once. They can process 1,000,000 images at once or 10 million images at once. But so what? They don't know which image is going to be perfect for what I'm looking for to put on my card for giving a birthday present. I still have to figure that out, which means I have to talk to the AI and get them to figure it out, to help them work with me to figure it out. So there's an exchange that happens. So it's kind of like the internet. You used to have to go to a library and you have to open this thing called the card catalog and you had to search through to find stuff, and then you find a number, and then you have to go to the bookshelf, and then you have to pull out the book. And now you can go to Google, you can type in a thing, and then you can get that information that you're looking for. There's a huge efficiency gain. And I think a lot of artificial intelligence is going to give us that huge efficiency gain, but it's going to cause us to rethink how we do our jobs, to rethink what value add looks like. And things that today we're adding value with a human, they're not going to add value in the future because there's going to be a robot that can do that 50,000 times. So like, for example, doctors who are looking at cells for cancer, an AI is going to be able to look at like every cancer screening in the United States at once and give it back. All those doctors who are doing that, those jobs are not going to be useful anymore. But there's going to be something else that's going to be adding value, right? So I understand why people are concerned, but there's still other things that are going to come up from this. That so far there always has, right? Like when we got electricity, yeah, all those whale hunters and those people making wax and candles, they all lost their jobs. But there's a whole bunch of new jobs that were created. I think it's the same here. I think AI is going to be this phenomenal tool that's going to make a lot of change, and we're still going to be required. I mean, one of the things I always tell people is an AI is never going to buy something. Like they're never going to buy shaving cream. Like they're not going to buy like they don't need it. We need it as people. So we need money. So there's going in order to buy that stuff. In other words, all that stuff goes away. If there's nobody to buy shaving cream and there's nobody to buy shampoo, well then because there's no money, well then shampoo companies go out of business. That's not going to happen. So, but we're going to have different ways of creating value add.
Interesting. How far do you think we are between AI, I guess, being on a autonomous level, kind of? Because the guy from Google, the scientist, when he stepped down recently, proclaimed as the godfather of AI, said that it was 40 to 50 years, but in his opinion, we're looking at 5 to 10. I don't know if he's correct or not, but I know that he's around different people that I don't think that we have access to in our lives as everyday citizens compared to the people that he's in the ring with. So it's just
Yeah, I
something
mean, so I
to
have access
consider.
to some people of like that.
Hmm.
Um, I hope we're 5 years away. I would like that. I think, yeah, 3 to 5 years, we're going to see maximum advance. We're going to see a lot of things go forward, but there's going to be failures, right? There's going to be problems that come up that are going to have to be fixed, and things can't roll out until those problems are fixed. Those problem fixing are going to take people. I don't know what autonomous means, so we have to kind of consider what does that mean. People are afraid of what it means for an AI to be able to do things on its own, but in what sense? An AI doesn't have a body until you give it one. When you give it a mechanical body, well, that mechanical body breaks because it's metal parts
Hmm.
that rub together, and so that's going to be something that's if that's what happens, you got a ton of jobs being created. There's there's internet stuff, right? There's AI internet stuff. So I would love it if, for example, AI could tell me better ways to create, or tell our medical people better ways to create molecules that will be more efficient in solving things like breast cancer or pancreatic cancer, which currently doesn't have a cure. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, and AIs are, at least today, when I look what I'm looking at, AIs are being custom built for a purpose. So you got the guys like Google and that are working on doing it so that you can get all the information you need anytime you want, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But that's fundamentally different than other types of AI. AI is going to be in
Hmm.
everything. There's just
I
no
agree.
way around it. But
We're
I
moving
mean,
into the George
imagine,
Jetson age.
yeah, yeah. I mean, imagine how great it would be if you could say, hey, look, here's a disease that there's no money in because of all the years it's going to take to research to find anything. And now and we, by the way, we literally have thousands of diseases that not a big enough population are there that have that disease. So there's no money going into researching it. There's no money going into solving that thing because it doesn't make sense because you need all these people, you need all this stuff. Imagine if you can ask an AI to give you stuff and it cuts 10 years off the development process. So now it becomes possible for us to do the work to save those people's lives or to fix those people's lives. I mean, that's phenomenal. And there's so many things. If you think about economics, there's so many things that don't get done because there's no economic value to it. And we can start doing some of those things, and that will change lives like crazy. I mean, there's so many good things that can come from this. And I hold more of a positive outlook. I know there's going to be bad stuff because there always is. But I think we miss all of these great things that can come from it that will revolutionize our life. And those are places we don't look at, but those are also places where people are going to be involved, where people are going to have jobs, where people's lives are going to be improved. And there's a whole bunch of people out there that go, hey, these things that we couldn't do before, they are now opportunities, only because AI is going to help us. So I look forward to that. And that's why I say 5 years is a long time. And I think he's probably in the right range. But think of all the people who aren't going to be cured over the next 5 years because it's going to take 5 years, right? And if you look at it that way, it makes you feel like kind of like, okay, maybe we should get moving. Maybe this isn't a bad thing. And there's going to be bad things, and we're going to have to figure out how to regulate it, and we're going to have to solve those problems. And they're not going to be insignificant.
What would you say would be a situation where we may have to regulate AI, just out of curiosity?
Oh, I can already see there's really bad stuff happening. I mean, the the propagation of misinformation. If you train an AI that its goal is to maximize views, for example, on social media for marketing purposes, well, it's going to maximize views. It doesn't matter what it says because you didn't tell it what it should say. You didn't say what it said should be true. You just said maximize views, and that's what it's trained to do. So it's going to take whatever it takes to maximize views, and that can be totally made up false, and it can make people believe stuff that just is wrong. So that really scares me, and that's something going on right now. Because if we don't know what truth is anymore, we have a big problem societally.
I agree. What do you feel about the deep fake things that are also taking place? You know, people
Very
can.
scary. Very scary. In fact, I was interacting with somebody online through my stuff, and they asked me, they said, "You seem pretty smart. Are you sure you're not an AI?" And I laughed. I said, "No, I'm not an AI. You can look me up. I'm right here." And you can see there's posts that I've done back to 2012. And I said, what scares me is the people who are born today because they don't have a before AI evidence that they existed. So with me, at least you can see, okay, there's emails to me. I have a whole media profile back to, I don't know, 2012, probably can go back to 2002 or 2003 with emails and stuff. So you can show I'm a real person because this is how a real person would have lived for all those years. But somebody born today, well, you could create an AI today that acts like a person, that grows like a person, that could act like a real person in 15 years, and you couldn't tell the difference. So I have a BAI life, and
What
so I'm a
is
little
a
bit lucky.
BAI life?
Before AI, right?
That is funny.
Yeah, yeah. Because if you're born AI, right, after AI, then you could be an AI. It's really hard to prove evidence unless you physically meet the person face to face.
You know,
Because
it's so
even online,
funny.
you can fake a conversation.
I don't think this is going to be the first or the last. Well, this is the first time I heard this. I don't think this is going to be the last time I hear this. For real, I could see this being a real prominent issue
Hmm.
like 8 to 10 years from now.
Oh
What do
yeah.
you feel before we continue moving on to the questions I have set in stone? I want to, last but not least, say, what do you feel about transhumanism, the integration of technology into the human body, which was discussed recently at the WGS, the World Government Summit. I believe it was actually last year where I was able to kind of finish
Yeah.
up with that, where they want
So
that
so there's a
integration and everything.
I think it's complicated. I know people are going to do it. I know that people want to do it. I'm happy not to have any stuff inside me. Um,
Me too.
I'm happy that my body is a piece of meat. One day I'm going to die, and that's all okay with me. Other people, want something different. What makes it complicated for me is when you think about biology, we don't actually understand cells. And it's such a simple thing. It's the basic building block of all living things. We don't really understand them. We don't understand how they work, how they function. We don't understand so much stuff about them. And we're just looking at things called microtubules inside cells and realizing these things may interact on a quantum level.
Mm.
They're actually small enough that they can interact on a quantum level. And you go, well, what does that mean? Well, I don't know. No, neither does anybody else. When you look at mitochondria creating energy and you look at all these aspects inside of a cell, we don't get it. So what we want to do is we want to start with something we don't really understand. And we want to add stuff to it that we don't really understand to do things. And that's going to be hit or miss. That's going to be guesswork. That's going to be, let's test this, let's test that. It's going to be big iteration. And we have so long to go. And, I think there's places to take those risks.
Mhm.
If I have a serious handicap or I have a serious, I worked for a camp with kids that are ventilator dependent. And if there was a way that they can help those kids to be able to get out of their wheelchairs and breathe without an external machine connected through their throat, that would be phenomenal. If that's what you mean by transhumanism, that's wonderful, right? That improves people's lives. And I think that would be the first place that I would hope we would start. When you talk about people actually cutting off an arm to put on a bionic arm for some reason, okay, if you want to, but I think that's going to be a different animal. And that's going to be a different social animal to attack. And I hope we're a long way away from people making those types of decisions. So,
So
but I
too.
think there's a part of it that I hope happens, and there's a part of it that we need to start asking philosophical questions about some of this stuff. Um, people get around to mental disorders, which are increasing like crazy.
Mm.
Where where does transhumanism allow mental disorders to propagate in ways that we would have never even thought of allowing to happen 10 years ago,
Mm.
right?
I think I even.
So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of complexity there. And this becomes really a human issue that we're going to have to deal with as a society.
Mm.
And I don't think we're ready yet. It's now's the time to start asking the questions and bring it up. But I think we're a long way away from being able to answer those questions. So that's something I would give 50 years, that before we get to something that's we're going to be getting to a stable place with, and we're starting to understand ramifications of things. Maybe longer.
Mm. I think another question I'll have to ask is, after watching several videos doing my research, uh, with the transhumanism, do you think that a human could become hackable with the interfusion of data that's being, collected from our phones? Because they have, I
I'm not.
mean, mountains and mountains of data on top of that.
I'm. I'm not so worried about that because I think humans are already hacked today. You can hack a human without needing a machine in there. I mean, you got one. I mean, we're talking on one right now. This phone, people are more connected to their phone than they are their food sometimes. So it's you're getting fed information based upon algorithms already. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, I mean, I'm not so worried that about that. I think we're already getting that. Your phone is controlling so much of the information that your brain receives. And when you perceive a whole bunch of things in a particular way, that becomes your reality. And what's the difference between hacking it? For me, it's the same. And I think media's job has been for a long time to hack into your brain. They're just doing it with other methods. So all this will be as a new method to do what people have already been doing for a long time. So I'm not too
Interesting.
worried about that.
Mm. Mm. Returning back to the life story. Um,
Sorry, I have weird views on stuff.
no, it's no problem. I'm the one who took it in that direction. No, I was like, we're going to go off task for a bit, and I want to also return back because I do have some questions I do want to ask you, for sure. Moving forward, and by the way, I want to let you know that I've learned a lot so far from interviewing you about
Oh,
yourself
awesome.
and just about the positive aspects of what I believe a lot of people's concerns are, right? Just in that tidbit that that recent comment, the recent subject matter with AI that we discussed.
And
So,
I think they're right to be concerned. I mean, and I think that's normal, and I think it's healthy. I just think there's two sides to that coin, and if you only focus on the negative, you miss the positive. And everybody is going to see the negative. Well, everybody's going to see all the negatives they're worried about, because that's the things to worry about. The way your brain works is it reacts to negative quick, and it puts all of your focusing attention there. But like the thing that I brought up about the diseases, nobody's talking about the disease that affects 1,000 people a year, because it's not economically feasible, and it's never going to break through any media because 1,000 people is nothing in the scheme of the world. But those 1,000 people are suffering, and if AI goes, hey, look, I found this combination of existing already approved drugs that can make these people's lives better, that's phenomenal. But nobody's talking about anything about that, how an AI can be beneficial. And there is literally probably tens or hundreds of thousands of little things like that that an AI will fix that nobody's talking. And because it becomes economically valuable now to do those things. And that's just been lost in all of the fear. And it's not that the fears aren't there. It's just that we know about them, so people are going to deal with them because they want to make their money, right? Because people are investing in this to make money. And if something's problematic, they're going to have to fix it. Other words, they're going to lose money. So there's economic, and then the things that they're not going to fix are things that you already know they're not going to fix, and you know why, because they're able to manipulate people using it. So, and they're already doing that with stuff, and they've been doing it for a long time. Google's been using algorithms for 10 years, and more probably. And Facebook's been using them for forever as well. And all these companies have been using it already. It's not like a new thing. It's just that now it's made it into the media. But Yeah, we missed the positive, and it's something we need to also know about.
It is something that we also need to know about, man. Like you said, our brain focuses on the negative first, and
Mhm.
from experience, sometimes it can be quite difficult to quiet that negative voice inside of you, you know? Yeah, we're trained to worry, you know, and I just want to highlight that during this interview is I myself have to, I mentally tell myself to like let go of things, right? People call it overthinking. I call it being caught in a spiral of thought. So when I feel like a thought is becoming repetitive, I talk to myself about it and be like, hey, you have to let that go because, you know, there's nothing that I can possibly do, right? You know what I'm saying? At this moment to either rectify it, like that's either like living in the past or me trying to live in the future. I think I deal more with the future than I do the past, right? But it's like instead of just cycling and cycling and like constantly thinking about this thing, it's either I take action or I let it go. That's all that I'm left with. Is it? It's easier said than done. Trust me, I get that. But it is possible. And for those who will be watching this interview in the future, I just want to place that in because I believe that it's something that a lot of people need to hear and put into practice, and that you're not alone in terms of trying your best to release those negative thoughts and those things that impact you negatively. I think it's important to feel all your emotions and go through those negative times also because they teach you something as well. But to just dwell in that is not good, you know. So moving forward, though, I did promise that I wanted to continue with the
Well,
interview.
hey, can I just jump on that
Oh,
because I think
yeah, no
that's really
problem.
important. One of the ways that your brain works, and think about this like 50,000 years ago. So you're walking through the forest, right? You're a part of a tribe that's a hunter and gathering tribe. And you're looking at this beautiful landscape in front of you. And you're so focused on the beautiful landscape, you notice there's this little thing down by your feet. It's a little black, but you know what? You're going to focus on the beautiful landscape. Well, that little thing happened to be a snake. And so as soon as you focus on it, you jump away really quick. Oh, and you forget about all the beauty and you jump away from the threat. The other person who just focused on the beauty and ignored the snake is dead because the snake bit them. They got poisoned. They died. So over a long period of time, all the people who weren't activated by the threat, they all died. And the ones that were left were the ones who were activated by that threat over everything else. The threat stood out, everything else was put in the background, and they dealt with it. So we're wired for that. We're wired for the threat to be more important because it's worked. Just today, because media companies, because the way everything works, the threats aren't pointed at us all the time. So we're overwhelmed with it. But that's how your brain works. It's there because it's functional. Now the problem is they're not true today. They're made up and they're fed to us, which is another issue. And I actually in my book I have a concept called future first. But I don't mean future 10 years away. I mean the next 10 seconds. So for me, when I get caught in the whole negative stuff, I go, okay, well, I have this thing called being, right? Which who am I being right now? And if who I've declared myself to be, for example, is peace, and I'm caught in a negative rumination cycle, it's like, oh, I'm not being peace right now. Okay, what do I need to do in the next 10 seconds to get into that? And then I live those next things 10 seconds at a time. Because it's really hard to say, look, I'm always going to be peaceful and then be like, have that be something. Because you can always be peaceful the next time or the next 10 minutes or in 5 minutes. But if it's just the next 10 seconds you're focused on, then it becomes much easier to get into a process. And eventually you can actually rewire your brain so that you can get into that easier. Because you're not going to get rid of the fact that threats trigger you. And that's just the way your brain works. But you can make it easier to get out of that threat situation and not allow it to turn into rumination. Right.
Mm. Mm. I like the way you minimize it to where it's like bite size instead of trying to take on this big chunk and like, oh, I'm gonna try to live the next 24 hours exactly this way. You're
Yep.
like, I'm gonna try to live the next 10 seconds that I have in front of me the best way that I can and continue to move forward in these bite-sized chunks.
Yep.
And I wanted
Journey of a
to add
thousand
on to
miles
that.
begins with the first step.
Indeed. I also want to say that you can't be too hard on yourself. Not too hard, and I struggle with that balance, trying to be disciplined, but simultaneously giving myself enough space for mistakes. And the reason why I I wanted to piggyback off what you're saying with the 10 seconds thing is because every 10 seconds could be different that you're moving forward in. You could make a mistake, but if you allow yourself just to feel that for maybe 10 seconds, I give it like a minute, maybe 5 minutes max, depending on your willpower, right? To like kind of not suppress the emotion, but maybe figure out a way to transmute it or let it go, right? Or figure out a
Well, let me
plan
ask you,
and
why
move
why do
forward.
you need to suffer a mistake? What's the value of suffering a mistake?
To be honest with you, I don't think there's any value in it. I think there's value in learning from it. But I also understand that there's different strokes for different folks, and some people are hard on themselves. I know I can be kind of hard on myself too, especially with as much pressure as sometimes I put on myself and I feel from other people to execute certain things, right? A certain way. That's why people also come to me and respect me as a person that does interviews, right? It's because the way I'm able to execute it, a certain level of execution I have that comes with its
You're a
own
great
pressure.
interviewer, by the way.
Uh, Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna just be totally honest. I'm cool, calm, and collective, but a lot of the times people don't know because I know some people they're nervous, right, when they come on. Some people don't know, but every time I come on this camera, I'm actually nervous. I'm actually pacing myself. My brain is going through because I have ADHD, so anytime I have a public appearance, my brain kicks into a I don't know how to explain it. It's like a matrix of its own. Like I'm pacing the way I'm talking, but my brain is shooting out plenty of thoughts, like tons and tons of thoughts. But it's just picking the words as I go along, right? It doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm speaking about. It's I'm pacing myself. That's what I was looking for. My brain is it's in a heavy state where I'm pacing. But back to the point that I'm proving with mistakes is sometimes people are hard on themselves. And a young lady spoke to me about this actually yesterday at my job where she was like, I love the way that you have like self-analysis. Let's put it that way. She used a different phrase, but for the sake of conversation, I'm gonna say she said you have good self-analysis. Like you're always working on yourself and you speak about it out loud. I'm like, well, one of the reasons I do that is because people are going through the same things. A lot of people just have this face of perfectionism, right? They want to seem like life is one way when really it could be going a different way. Now, I'm not saying that everybody be out there and be totally vulnerable, okay? That's at your discretion. But I will say that to make this point make sense and come to a head is that when you're striving sometimes to be better, and at times I believe that other people suffer from perfectionism, especially with the face of social media, you could fall in these little pits where you feel down and out because of mistakes that you've made, because you really want to, number one, you want better for yourself. Number two, in a lot of cases, especially depending on what field you're in, that perfection aspect is somewhere in your subconscious mind, even if it's not consciously on your mind, right? You see all these people showing this, showing that, even people in real life. Let's take it away from social media because everybody has this I'm not going to let you in, and really show you who I am. I'm just going to show you this aspect of myself.
Mm.
So I think that pressure compounded those three things, the pressure of perfectionism, the pressure of trying to operate at a certain level depending on what field you're in, and then last but not least, the saving face aspect of things. And like kind of not being too vulnerable, but only showing one side of yourself that people could be like, oh, this is cool. This guy, yeah, he always seems to appear like this. When you make these mistakes, sometimes it's a hard crash. I've learned over time myself to not fall so deep into certain pits and beat myself up because then that only leads to more self-torture, in my opinion, right? Leads to me sometimes making more decisions that I feel are bad. So, yeah, that's I to answer your question. I think that's why people
People do it.
dive deep
Yeah,
and
I
they
mean,
make mistakes.
so I used to beat myself up real bad.
Hmm.
And then I learned it's the stupidest thing ever. It doesn't mean that I won't fix what I did wrong. Doesn't mean I won't recognize it because you got to. Well, at least for me, I have to. I have to recognize it, and then I want to figure out how can I avoid this next time. But what I've discovered is I was beating myself up, at least for me, the way to motivate me or when I was motivated was when somebody told me I was bad, when somebody told me I wasn't good enough, somebody told me I was never going to be like, that's what motivated me. So then what I found myself doing is doing that to myself. So when I would get something wrong, I would be like, man, I'm a screw up. I can't believe I did something so stupid. I would beat myself up because that's what I learned motivates me. And so I was using the thing that was motivating me that I learned from outside. But what I realized is I didn't have to do that. Like I could still just go, okay, I screwed this thing up right here. How am I going to not do it next time? Okay, let's test it again and see if I can not. Let's see if this other thing will work. And I turned it into I could get past the need to beat myself up and just fix it.
Mm.
And it totally changed the negative part of me because that thing was there as to cause something that I didn't need it to cause. It was there to cause me to motivate myself. But in fact, what it was doing is taking energy away from me actually fixing it because I had to suffer before I could do anything about it. And then that suffering sometimes became its own self-fulfilling loop that sustained itself for way longer than was necessary. Because you screw up one time and then you punish yourself and then your brain starts relating it to all the other times you screwed up and then that meant something about you of how you are a screw up and then you re-justify it and then you dig yourself into this hole that you got to dig yourself out of and it doesn't take very long in with 15, 20 seconds worth of thinking and then starting to connect to other things that you screwed up, you can be in a whole negative thing all about yourself or how bad of a person you are. So I cut that out and I'm like, okay, I just tell everybody I'm a screw up. Lots of people don't think I'm a screw up, but for me, I don't care. So what? I'm living life and I'm doing everything to the best of my ability and I'm going to screw up. That's reality. Life for me is going to be full of a whole bunch of screw ups. And I'm going to learn from them, I'm going to fix them, and I'm going to move on. Because the alternative is I beat myself up, I kill myself for what? Because I screwed up when I already knew I was going to do that. Some way, somehow, I'm going to do it. And so I screw up a lot. I catch myself. I learn from it. I mean, if I don't screw up at least 10 times a day, I'm not having a day worth living. I mean, I really screw up a lot. You can ask my girlfriend. She can name all of the ways that I've screwed up already today. Right. So, right. She'll find them too. It doesn't matter if I see the same ones as her. Right. But that's so I learned that that's just okay. Like, you're doing interviews. Are you going to
Yes,
screw up
indeed.
in interviews? Well, I hope so. Because if you don't, you didn't learn. It already meant you were perfect at it. So there's no growth there. You can't grow if you're already perfect at something.
I,
So,
I agree. I mean, to be quite frank with you, because I do kind of want to like answer that question. I have screwed up during interviews. Um, but I will say I just had an innate talent for it. Like from day one when I started doing interviews, people noticed like, well, these are really good interviews. Like these are like worth actually like sitting down, paying attention to, listening to. Um, so there has been room for growth, but now I'm at a point where I'm like, can I grow more?
mhm.
Maybe. We'll see as time progresses. Um, yeah, that's an interesting one. I like the way you did that. Yeah, at interviews. I wonder, can I improve? But then, is that also subjective to what other
Of
people
course
feel,
it
right?
is.
Because one person would be like, "Oh no, you could probably do this better," but then other people are like, "No, that's perfect. Like, I don't think you should change that." So it kind of then boils down to like what I feel is
Yeah.
like, should I do more?
Mhm.
My assistant said something good though, and I'll give her a shout out during the interview while we're talking right now, by saying this. And I'm grateful for her for saying this. She was like, Troy, I think that you need to be like more of yourself. Like more of like, because she knows. So it's not that I'm not being myself, I'm being more uh, like Wusa. You know, like, okay, I have to interview you. This is about you. This is not about me because I could talk all day, right? Um, but while I'm here, I want to be mild mannered, right? Because I have a wide range of personality from being on the street and homeless for a very long time.
Mhm.
Um, so she was like, Troy, I think you need to show a little bit more, like talk more, like interact a little bit more. And I've started doing that. I've implemented that. So that was one way that I felt resonated with me, where I totally understood, like, you know what? I understand exactly what you're talking about, and I'm gonna go ahead and implement that, right? If there's any other way I can grow, if someone lets me know and I feel like it's something that could definitely be implemented, is important, I'll do it. That's fine. But there's certain things where I feel like you got to be mindful, right? Of what information you're taking from people, and what their perspective is on you and what you're doing and where it's coming from. But I wanted to return back to the interview.
Hey, I like listening too.
Yeah, no problem. It seems like people want me to talk more, but I do have other platforms that I'll be featured on in the future that are coming out, magazines, other appearances on other people's platforms where people will be able to hear my philosophy about what is it that I truly feel about certain things. But this time is dedicated to you, right?
Well,
And I
thank
want
you.
to make sure that it stays that way for sure. Moving forward, what critical skills did you learn working for SKF that you now use in life? Let's put it
Oh,
that way. And
oh,
please tell us what SKF is, by
yeah. So SKF is Svenska Kullagerfabriken, and it doesn't matter. So I got lucky as heck to work for SKF. Um, as you know, I didn't have any money for college, and going to U of M was crazy. I worked at one summer. I worked at a glass. I ran the glass cutting part of a window factory, and so I was there organizing the warehouse and cutting specialty glass for windows in order to make all the money I could to pay for U of M. And I worked like a dog. I mean, I took on multiple jobs just to be able to earn money to pay for U of M because U of M is crazy expensive, and I had no money. So so that summer was really tough, and I remember I earned just enough money to pay my tuition, and I get a note 1 week before school starts of, we're happy to announce we've had the smallest tuition increase that we've had in 10 years, and it's only $500. And I'm like, we're going to get $500. And I was lucky I got a grant. And that's how my school went. It was like I had exactly the amount of money that I needed and not a penny more. And after a year of that, I'm like, I have no way of knowing how I'm going to be able to do this next year. I don't have the time. And so I started a franchise called College Painters, and I painted houses. And I had people painting houses. But because I needed to I owned it, so I had to finish the houses when everybody went back to school. So I missed the semester. So I went down to the college office because I'm like, I don't want to drop out of school. I need to do something. I need to tell them I'm going to be back. And I said, I'll get a co-op. I'll do a co-op. But I was already 2 weeks late because I had to finish all these jobs. And so I went to the co-op office, and they're like, well, everybody's already started their co-op. You're late. And I'm like, yeah, but I really want to do something. And they're like, well, there's one company left. They just came last week, this company called SKF. Why don't you check them out? So it ended up they were the only company left that hadn't hired a co-op because they were late. And I was the only person available because I was late. And it ended up like matching up. And it was a Swedish company that did bearings, like car bearings and bike bearings and stuff like that. And nobody wanted to work for them because I was University of Michigan. So everybody wants to go to Boeing, or, they want to work, they want to do Ferraris, or they want to do space projects. Everybody's like that. Who's going to work for bearings? People literally thought it was a company that drew circles, like as a designer. And they were opening up a North American Technical Center in Detroit. And so I got a job there, and they paid really well, and it got me through the semester. And um, that helped me pay the rest of the way through school. And when I graduated, they sent me to Italy because basically they were having a problem because North America was new and the main area of design was in Italy. And so they'd sent me to Italy for a year because I was the only one willing to go because everybody else was married with kids and they didn't want to go abroad. And so my first work assignment after I graduated was to go to Italy. And at SKF, I would have, if you would have told me that I was going to be traveling abroad when I was a young kid, I would have told you, you are crazy. That's for rich people. That's for people that are in way better situations than me. But they sent me there. They like got me an apartment. Okay, a small apartment. They got me an apartment there. They got somebody to drive me to work because, well, my boss lived in the same area, so he picked me up and drove me. I had money because they gave me money to like buy food, which is like amazing. And yeah, I lived in Italy for a year. And
Wow.
in while I lived in Italy, well, it's kind of weird. There's so much to the story. So at the time I moved to Italy, Italians didn't have engineering degrees when they were 22 or 23 because they had compulsory military service, and then their university educations were longer. And so they typically graduated from college when they were like 27. And then most Italians lived at home. So I don't know what I'm allowed to say, how much I'm explicit I'm allowed to be here.
You can be explicit. You
But
can.
most Italians lived with their parents for like a long time. But that meant that Italian population was falling because people weren't having kids. So when I was in Italy, they made it legal for young people to have sex in their cars because it was illegal before that. And so you'd walk down roads and there'd be cars lined on both sides of the roads and they'd all have, steamed up windows because the kids didn't have their own apartments. So you're 27, 28, 30 years old and you don't have your own apartment. So, because they live with their parents. So this young dude coming from the US claiming to have an engineering degree, being 23 years old, made zero sense to them. So basically they ignored me. But what that meant, because I still had a job to do, that meant that I could ask them all kinds of questions and they just treated me like a student who didn't know anything. So I could get into everywhere I wanted because I wasn't a threat to anybody because I was just this young kid. And I mean, just a kind of a funny side note, one of the guys who ran one of the departments, I remember when he moved out of his parents' house, he was 35 years old. And he moved out over the weekend and he came to work on Monday and his shirt was on crooked and his hair was all messed up and he didn't have a tie on like he normally did. And he's like, I need to find a wife. I don't know how to do it. All right. And he's like, he didn't know how to cook. He didn't know how to do his clothes, nothing. It was so funny. But it allowed me to get into everywhere. It allowed me to ask people any question I wanted because nobody was threatened about me. And they gave me a project with a guy who basically nobody wanted to pay attention to because he wanted to make changes. And that guy is still my best friend today. And he's a brilliant guy. And he speaks like 5 languages, absolutely brilliant, but nobody wanted anything to do with him. And he didn't trust me because I'm some American guy, and he didn't necessarily appreciate American guys so much. But I was weird. And so he asked me one time, he's like, yeah, I'm going to go to Egypt for the weekend because Egypt is really close. And I'm like, oh, I've always wanted to go to Egypt. That would be cool. And I had no idea what I'm getting myself into. He's like, okay, you want to go? You can go with me. And I'm like, I don't know this guy very well. He seems kind of weird. Is this safe? And I'm like, well, I'll go to Egypt. So he booked the ticket, and then I actually went to Egypt with him. And we had a blast. And he told me, he says, okay, you're the first American who said they wanted to do something and actually did it. And then that started a friendship that's lasted more than 20 years. And I mean, he's really, really a brilliant guy that nobody would pay attention to. So that's my best friend, and he's been my best friend for a long time. My son actually calls him uncle. And that's one of the big gifts that I got out of SKF is that relationship, which has been so rewarding and so great. I never had a friend like that. I really believe if I ever had a problem, I could call him and he would help me. And I think having somebody like that in your life is so valuable. But he also introduced me to the world. I mean, he took me to, we went to lots of places. I went to the desert in southern Algeria, which is a crazy place. We've been to Israel. We've crossed over into Jordan. We've gone to Peru. We've gone all over the world together. That was amazing. Now, that gets into the skill sets. So the first skill set that it got me was openness to different ideas, different ways of living, and different ways people are. Because when you're in your own culture, you can see it. But when you go to somebody else's culture where you're the weird one, then you really see it. So that's one, and that's been invaluable. The other one is SKF basically. So I'd actually left SKF and started a wine company in the south of France with him. And then I came back to SKF a year later because I hated France. By the way, I'm living in France now, so something happened there. let's just say it's a girl. So then I moved back and I went back to SKF. But in SKF, you don't leave. So they wanted to punish me. So they gave me some of the worst projects. And basically I needed to figure it out. So I always had really big problems to figure out. I mean, things that hadn't worked for years, they'd give them to me. And there was reasons they didn't work. And so I learned basically how to take over, sorry, crap projects, and then fix them and make them go better. And that ended up being a great skill set too, is figuring out how do you take something that's been told you is a total failure, that's been told you are going to fail, and that's going to be the way that we get you to leave this company.
Mm.
Um, Taking that and then turning it into something valuable. So I taken this one project with my boss who did the groundwork laying, which was brilliant. We took and we built a division that was the most profitable area in there. Then I built it, and when I was taking over, it got too big, and people started to notice, and they were looking for reasons to shut me down. When they got me noticed, that boss that helped me get the stuff laid out, he goes, "Hey, look, we got a project in China, and in India, it's totally failing. So nobody wants to take it in China because it's a career ender. Do you want to go and do it?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So then I got to move to China, and I got to take over a project everybody thought was going to fail, and then I got to build it up into something that didn't fail and that was amazing.
Wow.
And so that skill set became the second wonderful thing I got from SKF.
How was it
So
living in China, by the way?
it was it was it was great, and it was a bit strange, and it was a great experience. It was a wonderful experience. It's the pollution is kind of crazy, but the experience itself was fantastic.
Said the pollution is kind of crazy, huh? I just heard stories. It's like China's like a mystery. Like, I'm about to meet with somebody in China soon for a certain situation that I'm not going to get into during this interview. It's legal matters. But I have to meet with them. They're going to be in China, and I'm going to be in the US, and we're going to meet through Zoom. But other than that, it's rare that, and I've interviewed one Chinese American who's featured on Human. Um, but other than that, it's like China's just like uncharted territory for a lot of people, so they don't know. So yeah, you said the pop. I've heard of that though. The pollution. Okay, so hmm, let's compare it to the United States.
Well, I'm from Michigan, so we have clean air, and think about it like this. Um, yeah, I mean, we have trees, and it's different. Think of it like perennial fog, except it's not fog, it's pollution. And I didn't realize how bad
Ah,
it was
I get it.
until I went to um, the World Expo. I was there when the World Expo came to China,
Okay.
and the Chinese government wanted to make a good impression for the World Expo. And so when the World Expo was coming, I lived in China by the time the World Expo came for 14 months, and it was perennially foggy. When the World Expo came, I saw blue skies and white clouds. They shut down all the factories around Shanghai to make it clean and clear. And I'll have to look them up, but I have pictures of blue sky and white puffy clouds across Shanghai. And it didn't happen before that, and I don't think it's ever happened since, just because the World Expo was there. It was absolutely gorgeous during the expo.
Wow.
So, but that's yeah. You didn't see the sun. You saw like the sun through fog. It was yeah. Yeah, but the country, I mean, the country is amazing. There's so many people don't realize this, but there's so many different cultures in China. China is not uniculture. There's tons of different cultures, tons of different people. People look different. So people think there's a Chinese look, but there's people in China that don't look anything like what you traditionally think is a Chinese person. And multicultural, multilingual. It's fascinating. It's really a fascinating place. So if you want a funny story from Sichuan, I like spicy food, and so I went to Sichuan with my girlfriend. Um, and I'm like, I'm going to take real Sichuan food. So we're walking down, and the street food in China is amazing. And I saw barbecuing beetles on a skewer. And I'm like, oh, I got to eat one of them. Oh, bugs is traditional in China, no big deal. And barbecuing beetles, yeah, I can tell you all the bug meals I've eaten, really, really interesting. And they put some spices on this beetle, and I actually took a picture of me eating it because she didn't believe I was going to eat it. It was really good, but it was spicy. And I'm like, okay, I need more of this. So we climb this mountain, and we go to something akin to a kind of an open market where there's a lot of food just for dinner time. And I take something like a beef rib, right? It's not fully a beef rib, but it's like a big old rib. There's meat on it and it's spicy. And I'm like, yeah, I want a good spicy one. So I sit down, and you need beer to drink with your spiciness because it kind of cleans out your mouth a bit. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to enjoy the spiciness. And I swear to you, I'm eating this piece of meat, and the flavor that I explain to people is, imagine taking oil, mixing it with gasoline, heating it up so that it's boiling, pouring it on your tongue, and then lighting it on fire. That's the experience of it. It was so hot, and my face is all red, and I'm just sweating, and my whole body is just soaked wet from sweating eating this food. It's so spicy. I will never forget that, and I never ate it after that. But I wanted to do it once.
Oof.
But
So
that's
spicy.
just one culture, right? There's other, like Shanghai is sweet. So when you go to Shanghai, they have sweet food, and there's a lot more sugar, there's a lot more, sweet jellies and stuff. Even with their fish and with pork, with everything, there's more of a sweetness to it. So when you go to these different areas in China, you find that the diversity is massive. And what we have as Chinese food in the US has nothing to do with Chinese food. They're totally different things.
Mm. Well said. Well said. Uh, I yeah, America put their own spin on it, and it's hard to get that authenticity when that happens, right? Like they have street
Mm.
Asian food, and I'm like, oh, street Asian food doesn't like. I had to find out the hard way that duck sauce does not exist in China.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
I mean, they
made
have
in
street food
the
in
U.S.
China. It's fantastic. Street food in
Oh, no,
China is
no, no, 100%.
everywhere. It's wonderful.
Yeah, but I'm saying the American version of that street food is altered, basically.
Sure,
It's a bit different,
sure.
than the authentic food. So when you went to China, did you see duck sauce?
Did I say duck sauce?
Yeah, duck
They
sauce.
have well, the one problem is that when they speak to you with Chinese things, they speak to you in Chinese language. So, you learn the names that they're using, and whether it's related to the US stuff or not, they don't care.
Oh, okay.
So, we have sauces there that probably are like sauces in China, but I don't know the names because they don't call it duck sauce, they call it something else.
Okay. Because when I was
Right.
growing up, lack of knowledge and information, um, I thought duck sauce was native to Chinese food,
Hmm.
but I learned from several sources like, no, duck sauce it's American made. I was like, really?
Yeah.
It was like, yeah, no, that's an American thing.
But
I was
But you
like,
also have to think that
interesting.
Chinese food is kind of weird. It's kind of like there's Shanghainese food, there's food from Beijing, there's food from Hangzhou or the Hunan. Every region has different food, so you can do a culinary tour around China and have totally different things. There's a place that they really eat bugs, like they do bug stuff. They can have fried scorpions and fried beetles and all that type of stuff there. There's In Shanghai, I had sauteed silkworms. By the way, they taste like scrambled eggs. No big deal. But you can also have like yeah, yeah. There's different. But it's not just bugs. Like you have different types of meat cooked in different ways, and you have different cuts and different sauces and different spices, and everything is different. There's some things just aren't made in some places that are made in other places. So it's really, and you have to also consider that in China, people don't have freedom of movement. So if you have like the equivalent of a passport to stay in Shanghai, you don't get to move to Beijing. You have to ask permission to see if you can move to Beijing, and that isn't always granted. So you're in your region and you're staying in that region. And to leave that region, it's not like you just go from, I don't know, New York to Vermont because you wanted to make a day trip. It doesn't work that way in China. The movement is more restricted.
Wow.
So obviously the crossover isn't always happening. So there isn't a uniformity of food. It's really diverse depending upon where you go.
I wanted to, um, wow, you have such an extensive life. I want to make sure I cover a good amount before I decide to close the interview. Um, what led you to understand the concept of being?
Hmm. Yeah, so this relates back to the stuff we talked about earlier. Um, when I left, when I was 12, I I mean, I remember the day that I decided not even to go to visit my father. And for the whole week, it was a Friday, and I hid under the bed. I hid under the bed in my bedroom at my grandma's house for the whole weekend because I was afraid they were going to come and force me, and I didn't want them to find me. My grandma and grandpa actually brought me food under the bed that night or that weekend, and I made a commitment to myself that I was never going to let that happen to me again. And I think a lot of people who are abused, that's the position they take. At least I've heard afterwards that a lot of people who are abused, they say, look, I'm never going to let that happen to me again. And they do karate classes or whatever. But I really wanted to prove my dad wrong because he really told me, I mean, basically I felt like a piece of shit. I couldn't, sorry for the language. I couldn't be an electrician. I couldn't be, I wasn't strong. I couldn't hit people. I wasn't a fighter. Everything that I wasn't. And that's why I got into robotics. That's also why I played football, and that's why I ran cross country. And I did all of these things to prove my dad wrong and to get myself strong. I played football so I could hit and so that I could learn to hit and it wouldn't hurt me, so that I knew how to fight back. And I took karate, of course. Like that's what a lot of people who have been abused or raped or anything, that's what they do. They want to defend themselves now. And I did the same stuff, that robotics and all that. I re-met my dad when I was 18. And you can imagine from 12 to 18, you go through puberty. And so you get bigger, you get stronger, you get taller, all the things that change during puberty. And I remember walking up to him, and I call it my Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader moment. When I left, he was this big guy, full head of hair, gruff. He was a football player, strong, deep voice. And when I met him at 18, I was ready. I mean, you can imagine, I was now a football player. I was strong, and I was in robotics, and I was all that stuff that he said I couldn't be. And I was ready to meet him and confront him. And I remember seeing him, and he was slumped over, and he was bald, and he had gray hair on the side, and he had a little gray mustache, and he had a big old beer belly on him, and he looked like life had beat him down. And I was like, wow, I've been fighting against this guy. And it was just this really crazy awakening. And I decided to attempt to have a relationship with my dad after. Then it didn't go well, and it's still not going well. But like the other stuff, like getting kicked out of the military, which happened after I'd seen my dad again, the momentum was going for my life. And when I came back from Italy, and when I started, getting into normal life, I started realizing that I was just, outside of going to Italy, I was functionally just doing my dad's life all over. I mean, I was doing, okay, it was a different type of a job, but I was still in automotive, and I was still working a lot, and I was still like worried about money, and I was still worried about getting a house, and I still had something to prove. And I realized this is just, all I've done is continued what I started. I'm still living the life that was a fight against my dad when I was 12. And I'm like, yeah, but what do I do instead? Going the opposite way didn't seem to make any sense. What am I supposed to do? Like throw everything away and just do nothing? I mean, where's my alternative? And somebody asked me a question. Actually, I have a friend, Patrick, and he goes, well, who are you? And of course, like I answered the question like everybody else does. Well, I'm an engineer, and I'm accomplished this, and I'm that, and rah, 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 rah. And he goes, yeah, I don't care. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And it started actually a very long friendship. Unfortunately, Patrick passed away last year. It started a really good friendship where he was the one who put me onto this. Well, who are you? And then it started a search. And I'd started with religion and philosophy as the place looking at it. What is a soul? All this stuff. And then later on, I got into neuroscience, which is another whole story. And I'd spent working at the University of Iowa doing biometric stuff. And there's a whole other thing behind that. Wanting to figure out, where do we start? Where is the foundation of who I am at the root? And it took a long time. I got into consciousness research, looking at what is consciousness, which is something that we're having a really hard time explaining it from a scientific perspective. And there's a whole conversation we could have just about consciousness. And I came down to this concept of being that I really liked, because though for me, I think soul, the concept of soul, the ancient concept of soul, which, by the way, I'm translating the ancient pictograph Genesis into English to because I think there's something really interesting in the underlying ideas that the ancients had around what is soul, with Rene Descartes' idea of being, with the modern concept of consciousness. I think there's a combination there where we're all talking about kind of the same thing, but we're using different paradigms and perspectives to talk about it. So I started looking into this, figuring, and by the way, getting back to Rene Descartes, a lot of people know the phrase, I think, therefore I am, but they've never read his paper on how he got there. And the way he got there was, if you read his paper, he said, okay, well, how do I know what I am or who I am? I said, well, let me imagine that there's this demon, right? Because they're talking about, a long time ago, and that's what they thought. Everything was religious. So there's this demon, and he wants to trick me and trap my judgment. So he's made everything around me fake. I mean, it's the modern day version. It's the ancient version of the modern day Matrix, right? Everything is there to trick me and trap my judgment. So my body isn't real. My table isn't real. This phone isn't real. You're not real. Nobody around me is real. It's all made up. It's all constructed by this demon to trap my judgment. And he said, well, if that's true, then there has to be a judgment to trap. My thinking is what he wants. So because I think, therefore, at least I must be, even if I can't prove anything else exists. That's where I think, therefore I am came from. And it got me thinking, well, he's right. This body might not be real. This stuff may not be real. The house, the table, the phone. Maybe it's not. Maybe because I'm only perceiving it through my eyes, through my ears, through my sense of touch. We have virtual reality. We're already able to reproduce some of those things, and we know they're not real. So, okay, what if? What if it's not real? Well, what is real still? What could be real? And when you search, at least for me, when I searched and I dug, I found out there's this thing that's there that I can control. And that's what I call being. But it's super simple, right? It's nothing complex. It's so super basic. And so when I said, in the beginning, when I introduced myself, who I am is passion, inspiration, so then I say excellence and curiosity, and I want to put passion and I want to put love into the world. I actually have a so that, which is to help myself and others go beyond our barriers and live lives we love. That's my definition of who I am and why I'm here. And it's so super simple, right? So super simple. Who I am is passion, who I am is inspiration, who I am is excellence. And then there's the future first. There's, okay, how do I bring that being into the world in the next 10 seconds? And the next 10 seconds, and the next 10 seconds. And if I'm not, well, why am I not? Oh, anything that's happening up here in my brain, it's all being made up. My brain is making it up based upon all the things around me that are all pushing my buttons. They're pushing my buttons through, what I hear, what I see, what I taste, what I touch, my basic senses. And if there's a snake, well, then I see it and it pushes a button inside my brain. And that button starts a whole process, right? It's like dominoes falling. And if somebody insults me, well, that starts a whole process. It pushes a button and it starts a whole process. And if I screw up, pushes a button, it starts a whole process. All of those processes inside of my head are driving me away from who I said I'm going to be. So then that being part that I found, I say, okay, well, this is who I said I am. It's up to me. Do I want to let all these things push buttons and drive me around, let those dominoes fall any way that they're going to fall and just follow along? Or am I going to stand up and be who I said in the next 10 seconds? No excuses. And I don't have to, but I have freedom to. But I found that no matter what is happening and no matter what's going on around me, I still have control of that. And it was reinforced to me by Viktor Frankl. And if you haven't read his book, Man's Search for Meaning, it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. Are you familiar with it?
No, please send it to me.
Okay, so Viktor Frankl, I'll send it. I'll definitely send it to you. He was a prisoner in a concentration camp in World War II, and it's actually hard for me to tell this story, so I may tear up a little bit. he because he was the only one in the camp that had a medical degree, he was a psychiatrist. And the Germans put him in charge of the hospital. And so all the sick people and the dying people would come into his hospital. And in the concentration camp, bread is life. You get a piece of bread a day. And that if you don't have bread, I mean, you're done, right? Because you're working to the bone every day. Bread is life. And he said, of course, in the hospital, they had to protect the patients because people would come into the hospital and steal their bread because bread is life. They're like, well, they're going to die anyway. I'm going to take their bread, at least I'll live. And he said he expected that, right? That's just a normal process. Um, it's hard, man. Sorry.
Yeah.
He said so what surprised him was that some people would come in the hospital and give their bread to the people who are sick and dying. And I know that doesn't seem like something to be upset about because it's just a thing. But when you think if you were in that situation, what it will take to do that and to say, hey, screw it. I'm not letting them take me away. This is who I am. And be willing to face your own death, to be consistent with yourself, despite that circumstance. That's powerful. And that just stuck with me, right? Because that lets you know that whatever excuses you have to not be who you are, it's all BS. All of it. Because if those people could do it under those circumstances, at least for me, what excuse do I have to not be who I say I am, to not be me, to let the world toss me around and push all my buttons? What excuse do I have? It's all BS because they did it. And you don't even know their names. Neither do I. And Viktor Frankl, this is one of the other really interesting things about it. So when the war was ending, the Americans came in and they loaded up all the people that were there and said, yeah, you're saved. The war is over. And they said, look, you, Mr. Frankel, um, you're in the best condition. So we need you to start burning the bodies because otherwise it's going to be a problem and disease and things. So they left him behind to burn the bodies. It ended up that truck was not a truck of Americans. It was a German truck that was there to fool everybody and took them off and killed them all. So he was the only one who survived. Everybody else died. And when I thought about that, I'm like, wow. So most people went and stole bread thinking they were going to live. Some people gave the bread expecting they were going to die, but they all died. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered is that there was people who stuck to who they are and there's people that let the world toss them around, but they all died. And that in itself is profound. But the reality is none of us are getting out of this life without dying. We're all going to be dead. Like that's part of life that's just there. And
Some people say
it
that's the only thing guaranteed in it.
pretty much. And taxes. Don't forget taxes.
Yeah, yeah,
But
for sure.
but when I looked at it that way, it was like, wow, that's amazing. You can have everything stripped away from you, everything. Your house, your everything material that you could ever have had, because that's what happened to them. Everything gone. They can kill your whole family, which they did. Everything can be stripped away. Everything. But there's still something that you can control. And that's who you are. And that's what I call being. And so that's where that all came from. And that's why I stick to that. Because despite whatever's going on, whatever garbage, anything, I can still be that. As long as I'm breathing, as long as I'm alive, that's something that will always be within my control. And nobody can touch it. Nothing can touch it unless I let them. So, yeah.
Mm, well said. Well, well said. Following that, I wanted to ask you a question. How, this question is common actually in my interviews when I interview men who are fathers. And I wanted to hear Because yeah, I just want to hear your answer to this. What has being a father taught you about being a man?
Well, I think, well, how much I worry. I think that's the thing. Well, because I mean, there's a whole bunch that was reinforced. Um, like knowing you're not going to get everything right. Um, making sure that the thing that your child always knows is that they're loved. Um, understanding the world will throw enough garbage at them that I don't need to be a garbage thrower. I need to be there to support them. And what does that mean? That's another thing that's hard,
Mm,
or that's been a learning. Um, but I've never worried so much about somebody in my life. I mean, he gets a cold and I worry. I mean, there's been nights I sleep next to his bed on the floor because he's sick or because he's had a bad dream and I guess I never knew how much I could care about somebody. And as a guy, guys tend to be a bit stoic. Um, they tend to be a bit emotional. But even like letting him making sure that he understands that crying is okay.
mm,
And I think I've cried more since being a dad than I've ever cried in my life. So yeah, being a dad has been a great experience, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. Um, but I think there's not one thing I could say that's taught me about being a man. It's a whole host of things. It's it's life changing to like every cell of everything. So yeah,
mm. Being what has being a father taught you about being a man? I must say that has been one of the most prominent questions that I asked during my interviews. Thank you for answering that. I appreciate you, 100%. Um, what what led to your decision to climb Mount Kilimanjaro with your girlfriend? Now that is like, how was that experience? So now we could do that in the metaverse. And
yeah.
to do it in real
So
life is just whew, it's different.
well, so a couple things. One is I was already doing a lot of mountain climbing in Italy because I'd lived at the base of the mountains, and I really enjoy mountain climbing. I wanted to always climb a big mountain, and Africa is not so far away, and it's from where I am, and it's the biggest mountain in Africa. So cool. Uh, but let's not make that so heroic of a account of a accomplishment because you can walk up Mount Kilimanjaro. It's not like that. It's not like the mountains like K2 or something where you're ice chipping up or whatever, and you're using your fingers and like you walk, right? It's a 4-day walk, but our guide, he ran up in a day and ran down, right? So okay, he's really crazy and in great shape, but Mount Kilimanjaro is like one of the easiest of the big mountains per continent to climb. And yes, it's
Uh,
tall, and yes, it's cold, and you go through 4 different climate zones going up, which is fantastic. Um, and it was a wonderful experience to summit it. It was really great. Um, but the decision was made because I wanted to do something like that, and I thought if I get older, I won't be able to. And if there's an opportunity, and oh, there's one more thing. One of my friends, she worked in a charity called Art in Tanzania, which educates young people all over the country. And one of the ways that they raise money to do these education, to build these schools and to put teachers there and stuff, is by tourists coming and doing these hikes. And so she told me about it as well. And that was probably the thing that sparked me to say, oh yeah, Kilimanjaro, this is like a thing to do. And so we did that, and we did a safari as well through that group Art in Tanzania, which again is there to educate. So we even got to go around and see some of the schools and meet some of the tribes
wow,
and meet some of the teachers. And yeah, it was a really great experience. So, but there was a combination of things.
interesting. Um, so when you met your girlfriend, how did you know that was the woman that you wanted to have kids with to spend practically the rest of of your life with. That's with
Oh,
time
she's gonna
limits.
kill me for talking about this. So I didn't. When I met her, so there's so much to the story. When I met her, I had only been divorced for about a year, and I met her when I moved to China. And, and this is going to sound so bad, but my first wife, well, my girlfriend isn't my wife. There's another part of that story I'll tell you later. Um, my first wife was Polish, like from Poland, and we met in France when I was running the wine company. And she was in France when the wall was kind of still up a bit. Like you had to pass through guards to get into Poland. And so it was really communist. Her dad was one of the guys riding on the ships, the communist ships trading with the West. So he always had good stuff. And I took her to the US, and it was a really difficult cultural adjustment for her. And we ended up getting divorced after 3 years. And I was so hurt from that divorce that when I went to China, and by the way, I could have married Chinese girls. Chinese girls are great. But I'm like, you know what? I am not marrying another girl from a communist country. That's what I said. I was like, nope. So this is the way I tell the story, and Virginia may tell it differently. So just so you're aware. Virginia and I met, and I was there to move some of her equipment out of her factory into this new technical center. And I saw her thing, and I basically told her that this is garbage. You're running a dungeon. This is not a real facility for doing field return, blah, 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 blah. She didn't say anything. And I'm like, okay. I just reamed out this girl that I don't know. Well, little did I know that she was going to be living in the same apartment complex as me. And every morning, because in China you can't drive as a Westerner, so you have to get somebody to drive you, and we all had to take a bus. And there's a small bus, and there was only 2 seats left by the time they got to us, one for her and one for me, and they were always next to each other. So I basically had to ride next to this girl to work every single day that I was not nice to the first time I met. But you're in China. What I'm going to say might be a little controversial. I'm sorry about that, but this is how I feel about it. When you're a Western person in China, you can have any Chinese girl you want. And there's a number of reasons for that. Some of it has to do with money, at least back then, but some of it had to do with the one-child policy. Because everybody basically, now they've changed it, but back then you could only have one child as a Chinese person. But if you married a Westerner, then that one-child policy didn't apply. So if you wanted to have 5 kids, well, if you marry a Western guy, well, you can have 5 kids. So there was multiple reasons for Chinese girls to want to date Westerners. And so there was guys who had, it was in China, there was guys who had revolving doors in their bedrooms. And if you're a Western guy, that's what you have. She was a Western girl. She wasn't attracted to Chinese guys. So basically I was the only option. That's how I tell the story. Because I wasn't going to date a Chinese girl, and she wasn't going to date a Chinese guy. None of the Western guys wanted to date a non-Chinese girl because, they had their pick. So that's how I tell the story of how I met. But I also told her that I was leaving China when I was done with the project, and I knew she was going to stay longer. And I was going to move to Italy, and I was going to do my MBA, and blah, blah, blah. So I moved to Italy, and she was really upset. And for me, this was just planned. And she came to visit me on Christmas one time, and I told her, okay, well, if you can find a way to get to Italy, then we can try to date, like seriously. And so she found a way to get to Italy. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's try to date. And we were trying to date. Well, we were dating. I was on one side of Italy, she was on the other. So we were going back and forth every other weekend. Like she'd come to my place one weekend, I'd go to hers. And then we're like, okay, well, we're getting a little bit old. If we want to have a family, we probably should get started. And so that's kind of how we made the decision. And so we'd been together at that point for 4 years or 5 years, maybe longer, when we decided to start trying to have kids. And then it took a long time for us to actually have a child, and that was a really tough process. So, yeah, it's not a perfectly romantic story. And when I decided that she was the one was when we climbed Kilimanjaro. That was on that trip. That's when I decided this is the girl I'm going to stay with.
You know what? Right now, I'm a little exhausted and exasperated. You are the one. You are the one, girl.
Well, no,
Oof.
climbing Kilimanjaro. So I was in really good shape climbing Kilimanjaro. So I was the guy I was the stupid guy who's singing the songs as we hike. And I'm like, I got to go to the bathroom. Everybody else, because the air is pretty thin. And everybody's, and I'm like, hold on, I gotta go to the bathroom. They're like, you want us to stop? I'm like, no, keep going, I'll catch up. And then I'd run over behind the rock and I'd go to the bathroom and then I'd run back and they're like, what's wrong with you, dude? And I'm like, no, this is great. So I was a little bit overly gung ho. But when you summit, what you do is the night before is because you're near the equator, so it's dark at 6 o'clock at night and it's light at 6 o'clock in the morning. So what they do is they stuff you full of food at like 5 o'clock at night, and they tell you because you stop and you set up camp. And I had like massive plates of pasta, and we go to bed at like 6, and they're like, get some sleep because we got to get up at 11:30 and we need to start going at midnight. I'm like, okay. So you go to sleep and you wake up groggy and then you start going. And she wasn't going to summit. She's like, no, I don't think I'm going to. But then she decided to the night before. And so we get up and we're starting to go. And you're going in the dark. I mean, it's pitch black. And so I'm singing to keep everybody, and everybody's dying. I mean, everybody's really in trouble. But I'm just like singing. I'm like, no, let's keep going. And we get up and there's 2 summits in Kilimanjaro. And we get up to the first one and she's crying. She's like, I can't do it. I'm done. And we're all trying to motivate her and get her to go. And she was done. And I was like so sad. And going to the second summit, I basically cried half the way. And I get up there and, taking the pictures and all that stuff. And then she shows up. She came. And I just broke down. I just broke down in tears. And because it was like fine, like that's when I knew we had this, like I was connected to her now. And I was so happy that she was there and so excited. Now coming down, I almost like died, but going up, it was like the greatest thing. And for me, that's when I made the decision. And I was like, look, I'm so attached to this person. We've done so much together. Like she knows me so well because we've gone through so much together. And so this is very different than the other relationships I've had. And so I'm going to stay with her. So there's an emotional part to it. It just happened on the top of Kilimanjaro. It didn't happen when I met her, soon after. It was years later.
Sometimes that's what it takes, Sometimes that's when you
Mhm.
know. At the end of the day, it all makes us human. But most of all, I like that it wasn't like a Disney fantasy, I think
Mm-mm.
I think we live in a society that's expecting that, but we're complex as humans, when it's not linear. It's not like, oh, I fall in love and it's just going to go straight and grow from there. For some people, it can be, and that's fine. But I think for most of us, it's a bit complex, especially when you're trying to, honestly, a lot of us are figuring ourselves out, whether we want to admit that or not. So, especially when you're figuring yourself out, sometimes you have to make yourself emotionally available for that person. Or yeah, it's just life is life is not one-sided, and I respect that you've told that story because I don't know how to explain it, but it's different, and I think it'll be refreshing for other people to hear that also. You know,
Yeah, I
um,
think I think her energy drove it the first part. If it wasn't for her, I was happy to walk away. Like I didn't have, well, I mean, I was injured, and I actually told her I wasn't going to date anybody for. I was married for 3 years, and I said I'm not going to date anybody for 3 years, and she moved to Italy, just like 6 months after I'd hit that 3 year mark. So she did the effort, she did the heavy lifting in the beginning, and I just went along. And then after that, when I finally decided, yes, then I was like, it was there. Like that's where I was. And then it was okay. How do we make this work out? And that's why I'm in France. I told you when after the wine thing, I left France. I hated France. And when we were living in Italy, finally she got transferred to France. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'll go with you. And I would have, and everybody laughed at me when I said I'm coming back to France. They're like, I thought you hated France. Why are you going there? Ha ha ha. And I'm like, yeah, but that's where she is. So that's where I'm going.
I respect that you returned the favor. I res- I
Italy's
wanted
pretty
to.
good though. So
You said Italy's pretty good.
yeah, I liked Italy.
You know, I just want to shout her out while we're doing the interview. Like the way I met you was from Katushka Baggio.
Katusha, yeah. Very
Yeah,
good
she
friend.
was she was great. Yeah, I liked enjoying.
Yeah,
I enjoyed interviewing Katushka. That was a really good interview.
she was
Um,
good. I gave her
yeah.
such a hard time. We were in Italy. Oh, I used to be a pain in her butt.
I can imagine the way that she speaks. I interviewed someone who's Italian that lives in Germany. Interesting mix there. I'm not going to get into the interviews as of right now. I want to be prepared to also close out this interview. But before I do, I wanted you to give us an introduction to your books as an author. I remember us discussing that prior to the interview, and I wanted to give you that space and time to introduce that to the audience for sure.
Sure. Yeah, so it's kind of weird. I remember I was the kid who almost failed English class in high school. And so later on, so I told you, I worked at the University of Iowa, and I built the Neural Leadership Lab to help people kind of understand their body using heart rate monitors and skin conductance and EEGs and stuff. And we built
Interesting.
that. So I had this really good neuroscience background. I spent about 4.5, 5 years there working on that. I still work with them actually on biometric stuff. And through that, I'd met a lot of really interesting neuroscientists and social psychologists and that, and I'd learned a lot from them. And so I was asked to co-write a book with a neuroscientist named Dan Radecki, and we co-wrote the book Psychological Safety, which is a neuroscience-based book about how to build teams. And that actually took off. I helped them, I write blogs and stuff for them, but that was my first experience writing, and it was super interesting. And that book actually goes all over. The Australian government uses us, the U.S. Security and Exchange Commission, Google at one point, McAfee. There's tons of companies who use that methodology to make their teams work better. And then I said, well, what if I write my own? Because this alignment stuff, this stuff about being, I'm like, I want to share this with the world. So me being into the whole sciencey thing, I wrote a science and philosophy-based book called The Alignment Quotient. And I put all this stuff in there, all the learnings that I had that helped me get away from, that either do I be just like my dad or opposite him type thing to find my own path with the Viktor Frankl stuff and all that. And I wrote that, and it was a nonfiction book, and it went like people basically, and it's actionable, so there's things to do. But because I want to tell you the story rather than I don't want it to be a sales pitch, because the story I think is more funny. So the book went out, and people really liked it. I got really good feedback, and they're like, do you know that you write like a scientist? And I'm like, well, that was kind of the point. I wanted to prove all the things that I was saying were linked to the science that we know and the social psychology that we know. And they're like, yeah, but it's hard. And I'm like, but it's all the knowledge is there. Everything you need to know is there, and it's actionable. And they're like, yeah, but the actions are hard. I'm like, well, yeah, you think change is like, you can hear where I'm going here. And my editor and the publishers, the original publisher said, look, you're writing it at too high of a level. You need to write it at like a 5th grade reading level because people want easy. And so that book's out there, and then I have a training course, and that's out doing a whole bunch of stuff. And I thought, you know what? I don't like it so much because I want to prove that I'm right. I want to prove that everything that I'm saying, well, part of it is because I don't want to hurt people. So I wanted to write something that was very well sourced, very well founded in all the different science, but neuroscience, social psychology. So that's how I think. And then I went, okay, Mr. Failed English in high school, let's see if we can write a fiction book using the same concepts. And so I set out on this journey last year to write a fictional book, which is a story between a hedgehog and a worm. Just, normally hedgehogs eat worms. That where the worm ends up coaching the hedgehog through the whole process and through what he's going through in his life. So that book, I just got the draft back from the editor, who gave me about 50 million things I need to fix. And that book is hopefully coming out later this year, beginning of next year. And it's a fictional story that makes it easy for people to understand what in the world I'm talking about and how in the world it applies. From an experience of this existence, or let's say this story between these different creatures in the woods. And so that's the one. That's what I'm looking forward to getting out. It's currently has the working title, The Hedgehog and the Worm: How to Create a Beautiful Life. So I'm excited about it. It's my first fiction book. So we'll see. But the idea is that it's a way to capture the same science and social psychology based stuff from the alignment quotient. And actually, I do include the psychological safety stuff in there because that's neuroscience based. But including that into a story that's easier to digest and understand and fun, right? And hopefully takes you on an emotional roller coaster because I'm not nice to the hedgehog. that dude gets hit by everything that you can imagine through the whole process.
Mm.
So I didn't want it to be, a straw man. I didn't want it to be this easy, happy ending. I wanted it to match real life. And so the hedgehog, I put him through the ringers. So, and when you see where it comes out, it's meant to be very realistic. It's meant to model a real life, and it's meant to show you how the tools work from a real perspective, not some made up garbage that's not connected to the real world we live in. So,
Mm.
so yeah, so I'm looking forward to that.
I wanted to write a book. I still want to write a book. I'm not going to give
You
away the
should.
title here.
You should.
I want it to be based in something called psychological philosophies, which is not like a real title, but it's something that I was going to make up because I wanted to take my philosophy of the world and the psychology books that I've read growing up, intertwine them together with my life story. Like, because I've been through so much and like, how did I navigate those thought processes and why I think the way I think and how I kind of view the world. It's going to be a bit extreme, but we'll see when time comes because there's just so much stuff that I kind of have in the shadows that I haven't like really pulled out to the surface. That's just like at a standstill. But this is my main focus, human, and just giving the platform to other people to come on and share their story. And first and foremost, before we close out, I'd like to ask you one last question. What does being human mean to you?
Hmm. That's an interesting question. Hmm. The question is the human part, because I already know. I already have an idea of what being is for me. Because for me, human is this. It's this ability to put stuff into the world and to experience the world in a specific way. But I don't know how to define what that specific way is. I'm like the fish swimming in water, trying to explain what is water.
Mm,
So yeah, like at least for me, what I'm coming up with, and it's kind of boring, is it's the ability to experience the world and then put something out into the world that's specific, that's particular, but only because we have this body and this brain and this social world and these ways of interacting. And it's all the ways, because humans can experience particular roller coasters of life, emotional and things that you wouldn't expect other animals to be able to do, because they don't have to worry about what somebody thinks about them on social media, or writing a book, or any of the things that are particular to being a human being, right? Like even a dolphin doesn't have to worry about what somebody thinks about their podcast, even if they have social relationships. So,
they don't.
so yeah,
And it's funny that you bring them up. They are very intelligent,
they
very
are very
intelligent.
intelligent, and they're
I
intelligent enough not to write books and worry about what somebody says about them.
I like that one.
No, but you're right. Like an octopus experiences life differently. So what being an octopus is going to be very different than what being a human is. But don't ask me how. I mean, I could give you some analogies to say, yeah, well, an octopus doesn't have to learn how to read as a kid, and an octopus doesn't have to worry about this and that. But I don't know if I could give you a clear definition of how I would define the difference. It might seem obvious, but if you really think about it, at least in my short brain, I can't think of a way to explain it clearly, shortly, of what the difference of being an octopus is compared to being a human, or being a deer, or I don't know, being a mosquito, right? Or being a bat, right? Who would even see differently than us and experience the world differently than us. So it's a great question. And I don't know that I have a great answer.
No
But I
problem.
think maybe what your podcast is doing is you're discovering it.
Yeah, one day this is all going to make sense. I keep telling people, as long as I stay consistent and life allows me the time to complete, what I'm doing here with human, it will all make sense. I told somebody that yesterday. I was like, human is meant for a future that I think is coming, and it'll be important for us to preserve our humanity as much as we can. So
I like
these
it.
interviews, like an artist, right? I discovered that a lot of artists, when they pass, then people turn around and like, that was such great art, you know? So I want to, I think, I don't think that's going to be the exact effect. I mean, hopefully I still, I guess like they say, receive my flowers while I'm alive. But I can see human being that way. Like people turning around years later, whether I'm alive or not, and just being like, ah, that was good. That was really good, So we'll see what comes of it. But before I close out the interview, please tell people where they can find you at online, where they can also check out your book at, everything all together.
Sure. Can I like give you something to think about what you said before?
Hmm. Go ahead.
Do we have time for that?
Yeah, we do.
Um, so when I went to the pyramids, one of the things that I realized when I was there, okay, first, they're amazing. They're much bigger than you notice when you see them in a picture. Um, I couldn't tell you the name of any of the people who worked on that pyramid. I can tell you the name of the pharaoh who, told people to build it. Maybe you could find the name of like one of the architects, but there's like tens of thousands of people who worked on them. I don't remember any of their names. And, I wondered if I was a pyramid builder thinking I'm building this thing and this is going to be great and people are going to remember me forever, that ends up not being true. Like I have evidence that that's not true because I don't know any of them. And I wondered if their lives were really, and then if you think about it, those pyramids burned for like 5,000 years, which is like nothing. So if they were in another 100,000 years, maybe they're just going to be small mounds, like some of the other stuff that we have that's like small mounds that a lot of people put a lot of effort in. And I'm like, man, is anything actually worth it? And I came to the conclusion that it's not, but that's not so bad. And this is maybe back to the question about being a dad. Samuel and I, we spend a lot of time in beaches because I don't know why. That's where my girlfriend likes to take us sometimes. And we have a lot of ocean around. And we build sandcastles. And we'll build sandcastles, and sometimes they're cool, and sometimes they're not. We put moats around them, and always we're building in places where the tide's going to come in.
Hmm.
And we build them knowing the tide is going to come in and wash them away. And when I was thinking about the pyramids, I'm thinking that's pretty much what they did. It's just the tide is going to take, maybe 100,000 years or 500,000 years, which is still blink of an eye. Just not very big in the. It's really big in the sense of a human timeline, but not really big in the sense of a universal timeline.
Mm.
But the sandcastle it's in the sense of less than a human day. And I realized, well, would I stop building a sandcastle with my son if I knew that it was just going to be washed away? And then I realized, well, I know it's going to be washed away. And in fact, that's what makes it fun. Like that's the thing that makes it fun and cool to build. There's something to build, and I got to hurry and build it as quickly as I can, as cool as I can, before the tide comes and washes it away. And then I sit there and I enjoy the tide washing away. Go, oh, I knew that was going to happen. And I thought, well, why don't I look that way about my life? Why don't I use my life like I'm building a sandcastle for the fun of building it? Because I wanted to, because I said so. I'm gonna have a fun in the building process. And maybe some people will see it and they'll like laugh at it or they'll think it's a cool sandcastle or whatever. And the next day they're not even gonna remember I did it. And that's okay. I never thought about it before. Why would I change, or let's say it like this, why would I change my experience of building a sandcastle with my son for the purpose that hoping that other people would see it and find it amazing after we left and after it was washed away? And if I did change my perspective to that, how would it affect the experience my son and I were having building that sandcastle? And what I realize is if I take that analogy and if I were to put the pressure on my son that we have to build the perfect sandcastle to impress other people, it would take away from the joy of building the sandcastle. It would take away from the joy of the experience of us playing together. And so I've at least been putting into practice a way of just enjoying what I'm doing for the pleasure of it, knowing that it's 100% likely that within the next 50,000 years or 1 million years, that it's going to be gone. And there's nothing that I can do about that. And if you don't like 50, if you don't like a million years, pick 50 million years, pick a billion years. It's going to be gone. And nobody's going to even know it existed. So let's just play the game that it doesn't matter, and that the important thing is to enjoy and to have the pleasure of building what you want to build and creating something in this world, even if it's for an instant. Make that the thing. And if that's what's driving you, then it's very different than the brain's need for like status or the brain's need for certainty or for fairness or whatever, which are traditional brain mechanisms. And don't, because that's just your brain driving you around. Whereas if the point of life is to have and experience things with other people and to bring joy and love and peace, then by looking at it that way, I think it becomes easier to separate yourself from all your wants and desires and things that your brain's driving you to do and really bring that into the world. Okay, now I said enough. That's just my little philosophy about it from that experience, or those two experiences. And I think it was my son that showed me that, because I didn't ever build sandcastles before. And I'd realized when I was out there that putting the pressure to make the sandcastle perfect or great or whatever, it took away from the pleasure and the fun and the joy and just being with my son and having that moment. And then when I thought to the pyramid workers and I thought to their daily work, I was like, okay, yeah, maybe there's something deeper here to think about.
And I understand exactly what you're saying. I want to be I want to be mindful of your point 100%, but I also want to bring in another point. Um, I believe that there's like a balance, right? For me in my life, right? Like I don't know what other people believe in. I have very I guess different beliefs in terms of like spirituality. I'm very rogue in that way. So I want to accomplish, I I like the ebb and flow of life, but I also want to take serious the purpose in which I've been given to like be here, right? Which is impactful. I've been impacting people before human. Like when I was homeless, I was impacting people. All right. I'm not going to get into specific details because this is, like I said, once again, this is not my interview. This is yours.
So you're
But
saving it up for when you get to talk about all your fun stuff. I'm looking
yeah,
forward to hearing that one.
yeah. I told somebody it could go on for 4 hours. I've been through a ton. Um, but the thing is, I feel like I'm here to live out my purpose. And my purpose, it there's a way that it also can be fun. It is. I do enjoy doing this, but I feel like I enjoy living life. Don't get me wrong, but and I know this is going to be like a reach. People will look at this like, what is he saying? But wherever I come from, or whatever's inside of me and where it comes from, when it goes back to where it came from, I think that's when I'll get my peace, right? I think what I'm building is here for a reason, and it will. I know it won't last more than 50 million years. I know that. This is a prominent fact. But just to alter things just a little bit, you know, just to provide more of human aspect through whatever avenues I can do for right now, right? And I've had that detachment moment where I had to detach away from social media. I had to detach from human because it became intertwined to my identity. And I had to be like, no, 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 I'm still, someone spoke to me. They was like, Troy, you need to separate yourself from that. You're still Troy. You're not just human. Yes, you own human, I get it, but you're still Troy. You're still amazing without even that? So the thing that I'm basically saying is, like I said, I don't disagree with your point at all. I'm just saying that I feel responsible to also take care of the purpose of why I feel like I'm here, which the time from my immaculate conception to where I'm at now, it seems um, a steady reminder is given to me. You have an innate amount of talent and you should use that for the greater good of humanity, right? And that's what my purpose is. But that purpose does not go without restraint or discipline to a degree either, right? So
Mhm.
I don't, I, w- I want to say we're addressing almost like the same, two different sides of the same coin. Um,
Yep.
it's like an ebb and flow, yes, but still being aware of your purpose because you still have to wake up every day, be disciplined, and provide food and put, things on the
Hmm.
table. So there is a certain, I think, pressure to that comes with that, depending on how you perceive that, right? Um, but I think another thing that I wanted to address too, to follow what you said, is that drive that I have inside of me. My drive has dwindled a bit because I don't like leading myself to spaces where I experience mental breakdowns, right? Burnout. But that drive has to stay there too, where I have to, whether it's the truth or not, many people believed in something that was estranged, but it's still affecting us nowadays. It's still impacting us now. What Leonardo da Vinci to say that to just throw like a name out there, a couple of other great people who have lived throughout years that we still hear about now. History is a little bit confusing to me, but we still hear about the names now, right? And in my opinion, even if what I do does not lead to that level, just to have that belief, to have that drive that maybe it can, I think is important. And I want everyone to to know that. Like sometimes it's not like you're telling yourself a lie, but sometimes you got to tell yourself something that you don't know whether it's fully true or not, but you're willing to find out, right? And
Let
that's the state
me
that I'm in. Oh, go
let
ahead.
let's take from Leonardo da Vinci.
Okay.
We know his name, but who cares? We know it. But, I mean, no, really, we know his name, but we don't know him. We don't know anything about how he feels or he felt. We don't know any of his struggles. We don't know any of his anxieties. We don't know any of anything that happened to him in his life, really. I mean, maybe you can read a historical book about him. Most people don't know. They just know the name.
Chris,
It's not the name that we care about.
Chris, I'm not gonna lie, my phone is dying. The screen
Oh, okay,
just
okay,
dimmed.
okay.
No, no, the
So
screen
you
just
got
dimmed.
like 30 seconds.
Yeah,
Let
yeah.
me close
Go ahead.
with this. Let me close with this. Who you know is you know that he was excellence. That's what you know. And you'd see it through his work, but you don't know him. You know who he was from the being. If you think about that, it's really, really interesting because that's what you actually, in my opinion, that's what you actually live behind. Like for you, maybe it's humanity. What you leave behind is humanity. And all the other stuff doesn't matter. The humanity matters. Anyways, okay. By the way, if you're interested, you asked me this question, thealignmentquotient.com. That's where you can find my stuff. And I'm on Facebook and that. And I tend to comment to talk to people and stuff. And I don't, coaching and stuff. And I don't charge nothing. Just ask me questions. And I love it. So I love the interactions. And I appreciate you taking the time to do the interview with me. And
Amazing.
I just appreciate you. It's been great. We've had always great interactions.
Great
Very positive.
interactions.
I
I
appreciate
am
it.
going to reach out to you, actually, like as soon as I put this on the charger.
Awesome.
I will, I'll speak with you soon. For all of those of you who will be tuning into this interview, we appreciate you. Thank you. And last but not least, as I usually say, please keep in mind, as this interview has proven once again, that we are all human. Have a great day, and I will see everybody soon.
Take care, everybody. Take care, Troy.
Take care.